Quincy, are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you sure you're ready? I think you think you're ready, but I'm going to start the intro and you'll be like, what the hell? This energy is wild.
I'm hoping you get me like that, man.
3, 2, 1. Oh my goodness. Good morning, good afternoon. Whatever it is for you, I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Zach Schomler. This is Strong Opinion Sports, episode 460. Joining me today is Quincy Carrier. Quincy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. You know, just kind of woke up, did some things. Now I'm ready to talk ball, man.
Are you? I should know the answer to this. I apologize for not knowing. Are you full-time making content?
Yeah, I've been full-time for about a couple of years now. I think I'm coming up on the second year now.
Dude, congrats. That's a huge, awesome accomplishment. And that means you probably have I have the weirdest schedule of all time. I'll be up till like 4 a.m., then I'll sleep till 6 p.m. I get up at 7, and I'm like, guess I'm starting my day now. Like, I don't have a job to be at, so I just kind of do stuff whenever I'm awake. Is that how you are too?
Yeah, I try to make sure I keep myself on schedule because it'll get ridiculous where you're like, I'll make that video. I'll start at 2. If I start at 2, it's going to be ready by 7. I upload it, and then like you end up with all kind of weird sleep schedules, and then you're like, hey, I can't get to the grocery store because I'm never awake when it's open kind of deal.
The worst one for me, dude, laundry right now. My laundry room closes at 9 p.m., and I keep starting my day at like 4 o'clock, and then I got work to do. I do all my work, and it's like 2 a.m., and I'm like, well, I missed the laundry again today, and now I'm tired. I'm going to bed. It's happened like a week in a row. I got like a massive laundry bin right now just full of clothes. I'm like, today's the day. It was 7 a.m. Yeah, go ahead.
It happens like that with working out too, right? Because like most gyms now, like there's like Planet Fitness and like a Crunch that like they'll be 24/7. But if you don't live near one of those and you live near like a normal gym, you know, it's like you got to be up at 5 in the morning. Or sometimes you gotta do a thing where you just stay up till 5 to get your workout in and go to sleep, and then we content creators do weird stuff all the time. I've never met one with a good sleep schedule ever.
No, it's gonna be a hard battle the rest of my life, unfortunately. Like I've been up all night. It's 7 a.m. here in Hawaii, and I haven't slept yet. I'll probably go for like a long walk after this, and then try to go to bed around like 11 a.m. I guess, because that's the life, right? I think so. I love your content, my man. I think you're awesome. I think you're well spoken. I think you're interesting. If anybody, for people who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and kind of describe who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, I do mainly like NFL, really football, kind of focus in on the AFC North and the Cleveland Browns most of the time. But I kind of focus in on those kind of things. We do breakdowns. Sometimes we make fun of the hilarity of the situation that sometimes could be covering the Cleveland Browns on a daily basis. You know, you got to have some levity in there, but I try to hit it from all different angles and all different sides because I just grew up just loving the Browns, loving football in general. You know, I'm the kind of guy that if I see like a FCS semifinal on, I'm definitely going to watch it. You know, I'm just kind of that hooked into it. So, you know, I just love talking football. My channel is really about talking football. I also do some basketball stuff, too. I'm starting to get into that. So, you know, just kind of all around sports talk, you know.
Absolutely, my man. I really love when you, like, clown on analysts. Some of your like, my favorite videos by you are, like, making fun of a hero of mine from my childhood, Colin Cowherd. And I want to tell you now, feel free to if you want to make a video making fun of me and the times I've been massively wrong, you're more than welcome to. That would be a great honor to make it onto. I think you call them Worst Take. Like, what can you describe that name, Worst Take, and where it came from?
Yeah, so it's basically like just a play on First Take, and it's just a joke on just so many times. Like, I don't really harp on people just for being wrong. I think everybody has the right to be wrong when you do this, right? We have to put out something like you're going to be wrong every once in a while. I think it's a lot more important how you get there, right? Like, how did you get to this conclusion? Because sometimes you could be right, but it's only because you guessed the answer and because you knew what you was doing to get to that answer, right? And, you know, I'll just point out things where I think it's funny or if you can go back and just show a clip where it's like he completely said the other thing 2 weeks ago, then that got busted. Now he's moving the goalposts. And just a lot of trolling going on nowadays. And I try to give people, in my mind at least, I try to give people the tools to know when you're being trolled and when not to kind of feed those trolls. Because sometimes we can get obsessed. I'm no better, right? A Twitter troll will get me on a rant for like 2 hours on Twitter if I'm not careful.
The guy that gets me is I respect him a lot. Stephen A. Smith is a wonderful performer. And sometimes I'm like, he kind of toes the line between analyst and performer. I'm like, do you believe what you're saying? Like, I kind of feel bad because he's got to do his show. Like, I feel like it's 7 days a week. It's like incredibly, it's just a massive amount of content. And I think sometimes the sports media makes more content than there really deserves to be based on the news and the stuff going on. I'm like, do we need to show 3 hours every day? Like, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Stephen A. also. Like, he's on like 8 different shows. You know what I mean? He got like 3 different shows. He's got a radio show. I don't know how he keeps track of everything that he says. You know what I mean? Like, he has to have somebody on staff that's like, yo, Steve, you said this. You know what I mean? And look, this thing with Stephen A. is there's like, I don't want to say you don't take Stephen A. serious. You do take Stephen A. serious because he is very smart. He's a very smart analyst at the end of the day. But if you watch enough Stephen A., you know when it's like, okay, Stephen's doing his bit here, right? Like, Stephen's going to get his licks in about the Cowboys. He's not really breaking it down. He's just getting his bits in. And then that's just kind of how you have to break it down and kind of enjoy it, because it's like if you take everything that Stephen's saying like he's dead serious, you're going to lose your mind at some point, right? I mean, like, it's like that with a lot of guys, like Colin Cowherd included, right? Because Colin is excellent at it too, or he'll just say something, put it out there. He knows what he's doing. He's about to explode Twitter with like some suggestion or something like that. And chaos ensues.
But it's kind of part of the thing, right? You have to like lean into it and enjoy it, because it is, Stephen A's got some hilarious stuff. Like, making fun of Cowboys fans are like some of the best things he does. He's got the cigar, the hat, the little, I'm like, I love that stuff, but it's not serious. It's almost a comedy bit. I'd love to ask you, my man, I don't know. I do like film analysis videos occasionally, and those are my biggest videos. They get the most views. I would assume that those are some of your highest like grossing stuff too. When you talk about other analysts, Stephen A. Smith, Colin Cowherd, whatever. Is there a bit of a pressure to do more of that? Like, I know that I love Formula One. And like, I get up at 3 a.m. to watch Formula One races, and like nobody watches, but I'm like, I make it because I like it. And I can't always only make film analysis. I would just be really, really unhappy. Do you kind of feel that way with some of the content you make too?
Yeah, like definitely with the Colin Cowherd stuff, right? Because that's kind of how my channel blew up, was doing Colin Cowherd videos and talking about, because it was like right at the apex of Baker Mayfield's emergence, his rookie year. And then there was like all these Colin Cowherd takes. And then the big thing, this all started because Colin Cowherd likes Sam Darnold. Like, people forget that. He's always going to be wrong about the Baker Mayfield thing.
A trunky West Coast blue-collar kid.
Because the whole basis of his argument was the Browns was a bad franchise because they didn't take Sam Darnold. It is like, you're still wrong. Like, even if, Baker's, he's up in the air right now. We don't know which way that's going to go with him, right? But, even then, he's still wrong on it. But, I with Colin Cowherd and all that, like, I tried to have a conscious effort of, like, okay, let me not always be ragging on Colin Cowherd, right? Let me try to vary it up and maybe look at different analysts here or there, or maybe just do different content altogether, just because, I feel like if I spend all my time like arguing with other people or virtually like kind of just taking down other people, I don't know how that makes me any better as an analyst myself, So I'm just, sometimes you have to be mindful of it. When you see something that deserves to be roasted, yeah, you put it out there, you roast it, and then who knows, maybe in 2 years somebody's gonna come back around and roast me for roasting that take, because it's just all, it's like The Wire, right? This is all in the love of the game, right?
Well, I think you're a really great source for Cleveland Browns content. Like, when I'm curious about the Browns, I go find you because you're like an expert on them and what's going on there. I'm curious, what is your tie to Cleveland? Like, you're in Atlanta. I know you lived in LA for a while. What's the Cleveland connection there?
Well, I was born in Cleveland and raised in Cleveland. About 20 minutes from downtown. So I've always grew up heavy into the Browns, heavy into like just Cleveland sports in general. And then after I graduated college, I've moved around quite a bit. But Cleveland is always where I'm from and where my heart is. And, I'm always going to root for the Cleveland teams no matter what. Even it could be any sport. If they decide they're going to bring the indoor soccer league back, guess I'm going to be a Cleveland Crunch fan. I'm just big into Cleveland sports. And just has a special place in my heart.
I got a tough question to answer, and maybe it's not tough. I don't know. But I hearing that you're a Browns fan, I empathize with you heavily because I know it's been some – I always call them a little engine that you like really want them to succeed, but it just hasn't happened like our entire lifetime, basically until last 2 years ago now. Why are you a Browns fan? Like, other than, of course, being from Cleveland, like at some point you could have walked away. Why didn't you?
I don't know, man. It's just I'm one of those guys that, like, you put me in a situation and, there's like two types of people. It's like you put somebody in a situation, they go, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to find something that does. And for me, I'm just the kind of person, you put me in a situation, I'm just going to try to figure it out. Like, I'm just going to try to make the best of it. That's kind of been my Cleveland Browns fandom. I've been doing it so long that now I feel weird to do anything else. But yeah, growing up, I think the Browns had that really good 2007 season, right? It was like Josh Cribbs, oh my gosh, Derek Anderson, Kellen Winslow. Well, I can't say
Derek Anderson had some really good games that year. He was fantastic for that 1 year.
Yeah. Braylon Edwards, the last really good year out of Jamal Lewis, right? Like, that was just such a fun year. We had this young left tackle, hot prospect out of Wisconsin named Joe Thomas. That was like, everybody's telling me he's really good at left tackle. I didn't know what a good left tackle looked like. I was like 12 at the time. But, it was just, seeing that team has the success, seeing the energy around it, just remembering being a kid, catching footballs in the backyard, running like I'm Josh Cribbs. It just puts a special place in your heart for that team. And, I don't care how bad the Browns get. I'm always going to love the Browns the most out of any team that I ever watch, right? Because I just have such a deep connection with them. And I love football probably the most out of any sport. And when you're from Ohio, man, you just – unless you like in Bengal territory, you're going to cheer for the Browns. Like, it just is what it is if you want to be – respected in the local community.
I assume you've been to a Cleveland Browns game, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been to a couple. I went to the opening game of the 0-16 year. I went to the first game where Baker Mayfield appeared at the Jets game. That was crazy. I had season tickets in the whole 2019 year. That was bad. That was real bad that year. But I always try to make a point to get to at least one game a year. I always try to check it out.
Is it fun? I mean, I think that's part of probably cheering for a team that's, quote, been bad for a long time is that if nothing else, like going to a game and being a part of the crowd and bad or not, like that's part of the fandom, right?
Yeah, I think the thing about being a Browns fan is like – no matter what, after a while, like it really filters into two people when your team's been that bad for that long, right? It either filters into people like me who are just like, hey, we're going to make this work. We're going to figure things out. I have done the mental gymnastics over the years where it's like we're starting Colt McCoy and he's being challenged by Jake Delhomme. And I'm like, hey, man, that might work out. You know what I mean? Like you just have this internal optimism about yourself. Or there's people who just kind of like watch the team and it's like a hate watch energy, right? Where they just are grumpy that they've been that bad that long, but they've been doing the same thing every Sunday for like 30 years, so they don't know what to do. So there's that kind of energy there too. A lot of the Midwest teams are like that, right? But yeah, with the Browns, it's definitely like that where it's just like the optimism, hey, it could happen, and the promise of after waiting for this long, if it does happen, it's going to feel amazing, right?
I hope you never lose that sense of hope because the minute you lose that, then you're going to be miserable. Like the fact that you hang on to that eternal optimism is really, really cool to me. So years of them being terrible other than 2007, how good did it feel when they won their division, won a playoff game? Like when they finally succeeded and did well, the payoff had to have been incredible, right?
Oh, yeah. That Steelers game, I'm going to remember that Steelers game for the rest of my life. The wild card game, right? Where I remember watching it. I could not believe what I was seeing. And then they get up 28-0. And then I get nervous because I'm like, the Steelers will do this to us, where we would blow that lead and lose at Heinz, because the Browns at Heinz Field, it's been like a thing for like the last 30 years. Ever since they built that stadium in Pittsburgh, it's been a rough go of it for the Cleveland Browns. So, yeah, you got to celebrate the victories and enjoy it. I remember the day after, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen next week against Kansas City, but, cherish what we just saw right there, because that was big man in Heinz. We got him to cry after all he's done to the Cleveland Browns in the last 20 years. Oh, it was one of the best moments of my life.
I love to hear that. That's awesome. We have to talk about last year, because, this past 2021 season, because I thought they were a Super Bowl contender. I mean, I predicted them to go 13-4, win their division, and it didn't happen. So what was your opinion on what happened last year? Why did it go wrong? And how'd you feel about it?
Yeah, when you look at the 2021 season, right, I still think that roster is still amazing, right? They walked into the season with some really good players on that roster. And I think they started off, look, this team never looked like they were ever close to reaching their potential, but they started off like 3-1. And you can see the problems there at 3-1. And at some point, I think after that Arizona game where they just got completely destroyed, J.J. Watt just jumped on Baker, and Baker was already injured. The wheels just looked like they fell off of this team. And what I mean by that is you started to notice that things were being done in football games, during football games, that just you could not really make a clear argument how that helps the Browns win football games, right? Like, I was talking with somebody about this earlier this week. The usage of David Njoku. David Njoku was clearly the Browns' best tight end by like every metric. He's the best blocker, most dynamic athlete at the position. The Browns run a ton of 3 tight end sets. So why isn't he being featured more? But instead, we're throwing the ball to Austin Hooper, who we pay more money to, but he's much less productive, much less reliable than David Njoku. And you have to ask yourself, why was that happening? You know what I mean? Was that about winning? Every single thing that happened with Odell Beckham in 2021, you ask yourself, was this about winning? Why didn't he play that first game versus Kansas City when he insisted that he was healthy and ready to go a week before? Why was it that it got to the point, right, where after the bye week, all you could do was release him for free? How did it get to that point? How did we get to that area? Why weren't we giving him the ball more is another thing that you can ask, right? Why weren't we trying to figure out ways to get that ball in the hands of Jarvis Landry, the ball in the hands of Odell Beckham? I know there's this narrative out there, and look, Baker has some good traits and a lot of bad traits as well, so I'm not here just completely defending the guy. But the idea that he can't throw to wide receivers is absurd. He had 2 1,000-yard wide receivers in 2019. He has had his best years when he targets these wide receivers, but it looked like this year, I mean, at times, I don't want to say he was refusing to throw the ball, but you would see plays where it's impossible you didn't see this guy, right? He's right there in front of you for the first down. Why didn't you throw him the football? You just look at this team, only on the offensive side. Defensive side, I think they were phenomenal. They got their act together at the end of the game, at the end of the year, and really were one of the best units in football. But offensively, just a lot of stuff happened with that Browns team that I'm like, man, I don't think anybody was focused on. I think Kevin Stefanski at some point got fixated with proving people that his offense wasn't the problem, right? With Odell and all that. And I think Baker got fixated with proving that he wasn't the problem with Odell. And I think at some point Odell got fixated on proving that it's not him that's the problem with the offense, right? Because you had that weird triangle going throughout the year of blame where it's Odell's the issue with the offense. The Browns are better without Odell. It was a dominant storyline coming in about this Browns team. Are they going to be good with their best wide receiver, right? And they couldn't figure it out. They could never get it clear. And it was always that tension, and it felt like a tug of war, like a 3-way tug of war. And then once Odell left, it just turned into a 2-way tug of war between what Baker is trying to prove, what the offense is, what Kevin's trying to prove. And You know, when you get in those situations where, yeah, you might have a really talented roster, but you're not pulling all of your energy in the same direction, which is towards trying to win football games, well, you're just not going to win that many football games, no matter how good you are. It's amazing they won, They won 8 games this year. They went 8-9, and swept the Bengals. It's amazing they were able to do that just because the strength of the defense. Because if you look at some of these outputs that the offense gave you, I mean, these are some bad games. The Minnesota Vikings game was one of the most atrocious offensive football games I've ever seen in my life. And if it would be the worst if I didn't also see the Browns play the Lions this year with Tim Boyd at quarterback, right? And it was Tim Boyd versus Baker Mayfield, and both were playing awful. There was a point where the Browns literally just had to score 3 or 7 points.
Well, people were like, is Tim Boyle a better quarterback than Baker Mayfield? That can't be true, right? But there was that discussion was happening on Twitter during that game. People were like, who's worse in this game? This third string quarterback in Detroit or Baker, right? That should never be a discussion.
Yeah, I don't care what's going on with you. If you on the football field and in pads, man, and you a number 1 overall pick, nobody should ever question if you're better than Tim Boyle. And no disrespect to Tim Boyle. Look, I'm happy he got to the NFL, but I don't know if you ever looked up Tim Boyle's college numbers. I don't know how he got there.
Dude, excuse me, they're dog shit. It's he threw more interceptions by twice as many interceptions as touchdowns. It's unbelievable, actually, how bad he was in college. Yeah, no offense to him, but you're like, how did he make it? I don't get it. Go ahead.
He transferred down a level, and the numbers were still bad. He must have the most amazing agent ever, or it's he got to look at a preseason game apparently, and he looked good in the preseason with the Packers, and that got him into the league. Look, man, I'm happy the dude's in the league, but Tim Boyle, nobody should ever say that name seriously in the same breath as your starting quarterback when you drafted a dude number 1 overall. And the offense this year was just an absolute burden. I think it was one of the worst offenses in football. It was a pain to watch, And look, I watched the whole AFC North. I've seen the Steelers' offense for the last 2 years. It's bad. Don't get me wrong. That's a bad offense. But the Browns' offense this year, given the talent that they have and given the lack of success and explosion that they were able to create on a regular basis, it was astonishingly awful, shocking. That's the offense would not only be bad. Nobody thought this offense would be bad. That they would be that bad too. That was just head scratching, because they should not be that bad. They have enough players to where they should not be that bad offensively, and yet they were. And this offseason is going to be about figuring out what the problem was. I think a lot of it's on the quarterback. I know that he had the labrum injury. I know a lot of people want to use that as a reason for why he didn't play well. But me personally, look, I understand he was hurt. I understand it's not an easy injury to come back from, and it's not an easy injury to play through, because it was on his non-throwing shoulder. I understand it still affects you when you're throwing, but also you were out there, man. You played in those games, so I can't ignore what I saw. And also, you got cleared. I don't know, any other player in that situation at any other position, they get judged off of what they put on tape, even if they go out there hurt. Myles Garrett has had 2 seasons where he disappears at the end of the year. Nobody's giving him a break because he was hurt at the end of those years. They're just oh, you had 16 sacks in the first 14 games, and then you disappeared in the last 3. Now you're not Defensive Player of the Year. Nobody gets a break for what they put on tape in the NFL, especially because, the general, the unspoken rule is, if you are clear to play and you decide to play, you better be up to standard. That's just what it is. And if you can't play up to standard, but yet you played 14 games after you got hurt, I don't know what to do with that, right? I don't know how to evaluate that, because the ideal that I'm just going to throw out a whole year of tape because of an injury, I don't know. It seems kind of ridiculous when the dude played most of the year.
No, I totally agree. And his decision-making isn't made in his left shoulder either. You know what I mean? That's a mental processing issue. And I'm curious, because he did something I really liked recently where he put out this announcement: I'm deleting social media. I'm staying off social media. I think that's good for him. I think he's the kind of guy who probably pays a little bit too much attention to what people say about him. And I've said for years, I'm curious on your thoughts about this. I played quarterback in college, and my whole journey to get to college was to prove a coach wrong. I had a coach my sophomore year of high school who said, "You're never going to play college football. You're not good enough." So my whole journey through high school football is to get to college to prove that guy wrong. And I got to college, and suddenly I flamed out. My motivation was gone because I'd already proven that guy wrong, and I had to find new motivation. Baker really, really loves to look at the quote haters and people that don't like him and view himself like an underdog. And that story worked really well when you're a two-time walk-on. But then when you win a Heisman Trophy, you're a number one pick, you're a franchise quarterback, you win a playoff game. That narrative doesn't work anymore. And I think we're seeing a guy who is having a hard time figuring out why he's doing things and what his motivation is. And that sounds like a classical thing to make, his motivation, blah, blah, blah. But I think he's in his head a lot. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, I definitely can see that because I thought that was when I got excited about Baker Mayfield at the end of 2020 is when I thought that a lot of that stuff he found a way to not do, right? Because I understand it, right? Me and Baker are relatively the same age. Well, we're the exact same age. We have like the birthday and like within the same month. So I'm like, I get where he was at mentally for the last few years where it's like, I did a lot of that stuff. Like, I got to college and I wanted to graduate to prove people wrong. Never thought I could graduate and all that. Like, obviously, I wasn't a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at Oklahoma or anything like that. So I can't fully relate. But I understand, like, that motivation to prove people wrong, it can be really helpful, especially like in your early 20s, when you got all that energy. But once you get older and also once you get more exposed to just more consistent levels of scrutiny in your life, right? Like, me and you, we both do this thing where we talk in front of a camera almost every day in front of people who got things to say about what we have to say. The ideal that I'm just going to prove the haters wrong, it just becomes a lot more complex and a lot more tiresome, right? It can't be your motivation anymore. So you have to find out other things that get you up in the morning, that make you want to be great at what you do. And a lot of those things are founded in more positive roots than just trying to prove somebody wrong. Maybe you just want to prove people right. And at the end of 2020, I felt like he was at a good place where it wasn't about, I'm gonna troll Colin Cowherd back now that I had a good year and I'm gonna get on these memes. Like, he didn't do any of that. But then this year he starts to play bad and he falls back into the same stuff where it's like, now I'm bookmarking tweets that people said about me that were negative, and then I'm screenshotting stuff and I'm clapping back at reporters again, and it's just after a while it's just not what you want out that position. Like, it's fun at the beginning because it's different, but then you start to notice that just wears thin on a lot of people after a while, and it's just exhausting kind of energy wise that you're always talking about people who are doing you wrong and all that. And it's just, I don't know, with him, there's a lot to look at with Baker Mayfield, physically and mentally, because some of this stuff does seem like it's mental with him. But that's really what I want to see out of him next year. Is like, is he going to come back from this labrum injury and try to prove to the world that he sucked this year just because it was the labrum, or is he going to try to actually just win football games? Because with the roster that the Browns have, I want a quarterback who wants to win football games. I don't want a quarterback who wants to prove something. I don't care about that. I want a quarterback who's going to do what needs to happen to win, because while it might sound like it lines up, there's a lot of times in life where, what it takes to prove somebody wrong and what it takes to win a football game might be two different things, and he has to find his peace and balance with that before he could ever be a consistent starting level quarterback like he's shown he has the ability to be.
I think that positive motivation works way better for me. Like, I love my job. And I want to always love my job. So, like, sometimes I need to take a day off because I'm not feeling it. And that feels bad, but I'd rather make less content and be happy than be forcing it all the time. And you look at guys like Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers, despite any negative criticism you could make of the guy, he clearly loves his teammates and loves working with the guys he works with on a day-to-day basis. Tom Brady loves the game of football. I'd love to see Baker be motivated by his love of the game and his love for his teammates rather than people on Twitter trolling him. Which leads me to my question: do you read mean comments? Because I know I do, but I try not to. Like, as little as I can, I try to avoid comments as much as humanly possible. Do you read comments on your YouTube videos?
It's interesting, right? Because sometimes it feels like the only comments they notify that you get on the little YouTube Studio app are the worst comments that you could possibly read, right?
We all have that fucking app. Oh my God, yeah.
and it's like, oh man, this guy like wrote a 3-page report on how to, like, I'm not gonna read all that, to be honest. Like, if you're anybody who's ever been in my comment section and left me, like, if it says read more, if it drops like a substantial amount after read more, I'm just gonna tap out. All right, bro, you got it. But
they worked harder for that than you did on the entire video.
yeah, and it's like, I have a point where it's like, I try to keep track of it mentally because I feel like I'm going to have that curiosity to want to check my comment section just to see what's going on down there, right? Because I don't want to be out of touch and not realize that I'm out of touch with something, right? So I always try to keep an eye on it and check it out, or make sure like nothing crazy is going on down there.
Or like that you didn't have like a massive editing issue, or like that's when I'm like, is the video like not screwed up? Because sometimes I'll be like, hey, your audio's messed up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I better fix that right now. Thank God someone commented, right?
Yeah, it's something like that. But, sometimes you'll see the negative ones. Some of them, sometimes some people do have good critiques in there. A lot of the times it's just kind of funny, and you screenshot it and you send it to like your other YouTuber friend, and you're like, yeah, this guy thinks we should trade Myles Garrett for a 3rd and a 5th. This is crazy, right? Like,
Absolutely. So you said something earlier, and I totally agree. I said going into the year that the Browns had arguably the best roster in the NFL. I mean, this is a football team that won a playoff game 2 years ago, and last offseason got even better. They added, OBJ was coming off of an injury. They added Jadeveon Clowney. They brought in Greg Newsome to play corner. Like, I thought the Browns roster, after winning a playoff game, got even better, which made it even more disappointing that they didn't perform. And then you look at the way, what's really, and you talked about this, and I want to respond to it, is the way that they didn't keep Odell Beckham Jr. happy. Like, it was so easy, it seemed like, for the Rams to give him targets and be nice to him and, like, promote him and, like, support him and lift him up on social media and just say, like, we love the guy and we're proud of him and whatever. Like, it doesn't seem like it's actually that hard to keep OBJ happy. Why couldn't Cleveland do that? I'm just baffled. Like, you don't want to get your really good receiver the football? You're not going to target him on 3rd down? You're not going to talk about how good he is in one-on-one matchups and why you love him? Like, what was going on there?
There's a couple of things I think went into that, right? The people who ended up having Odell the last 2 years weren't the people that traded for him, right? John Dorsey got fired at the end of 2019. And Odell's numbers that year, like, they weren't using Odell great. It was a Freddie Kitchens offense. It was a mess. That Todd Monken, Freddie Kitchens experiment was a mess of a offensive concept. Like, just bad stuff happened there, right? But they tried to get Odell the ball a lot of the time. They did things. They refused to put him on, like, post routes, like, for whatever reason. That's what he's best at. And, but they got him the ball. He had over 1,000 yards. I don't think he was unhappy at that point. But in 2020, and, like, look, I think the ideal about Odell, and I think the thing that people get wrong about him is that I don't think he cares about bulk, like, production yards, right? I don't think he really minds that. But he wants to feel like he's a part of the game. And I don't blame him for that, right? He's a super talented dude. I always kind of try to relate this to, let's say you're really good at something at your job, right? I don't know what job to relate it to, but let's say, for example, you work at an IT company, you're the best coder that the company has, right? And they have you on a website project, and you know that you can code the best out of anybody in the room, but instead they got you picking colors for, the background. Like, it's like, man, I could do so much more. Like, and whenever you feel like you could offer something to the team that can help them win, and they refuse to, and it feels like people don't want to put you in that position, that's going to be a frustrating situation because you want to win football games at the end of the day, right? And I think what happened with the Browns is that they lost sight of the human part of that locker room because it wasn't hard, right? Like, just give him a couple of red zone targets, right? Just throw a fade up to him and see what happens. He's Odell Beckham. He's really good, Well,
I want to say, people talk about how OBJ's selfish or has an ego. Like, he got massively overshadowed by Cooper Kupp in LA. Like, Cooper Kupp was the go-to guy for the Rams, and Odell didn't have a problem with that at all. Like, there was no problem in that locker room and that receiver room with Cooper being the go-to guy. He understood his role. So anybody who's like, OBJ on the Browns had an ego and just wanted the ball, that I'm like, no, he doesn't need to be the go-to guy. But you're right, he wants to be involved. And he certainly, if you're losing and not giving the ball on third down and you're having turnover and downs and stuff like that, then he's going to have a problem, which, you're right, totally makes sense to me.
And also, like, this is one of those things I try to tell people. Like, I get killed by the local people, because they think I defend him too much, right? Because they're all against Odell at this point. I don't blame them, because, like, they're kind of put in that position. But from where I'm at, I kind of have to look at things kind of more charitably for both sides of this, right?
We try to be objective and fair.
Yeah, or at least fair, right? Like, I know it's hard to be objective when you're just a fan of a team, but at least be fair, right? And with Odell, it's like, if he were this terrible teammate, his teammates wouldn't love him as much as they do. But his teammates, like, they don't just like the guy. They don't just defend him. They go out of their way to defend the dude. Like, I have not seen a team love a dude more than, like, a lot of these dudes on the Browns love Odell. People try to write it off, it's because he's a celebrity. Oh, he gives them shoes or something ridiculous like that. No, I think the dude's genuinely, like, a good dude to have on your football team. He's a real hard practicer. He's not like he'll dress up, or he'll have a nice outfit on, or he'll have some cool cleats on, but he's not doing
personality.
Yeah, but he's not doing any of the stuff that, like, he's not Chase Claypool celebrating his first down when the clock's running on a 2-minute drill or something like he doesn't do that, right? So the team likes the dude, and I think this is one of the things the Browns front office is going to have to make amends for, is that they made a wildly unpopular decision in that locker room. If you ask anybody in that Cleveland Browns locker room, do they feel like Odell quit on them? They'll tell you no, he did not quit on the team. If you ask anybody in that locker room, should Odell have been cut? They will tell you no. They're publicly, like, Mac Wilson has been public about it on Twitter. John Johnson, a bunch of dudes have been public in their defense about Odell Beckham after the dude got cut and went to the Rams, right? So the narrative about Odell is that he quit on the team, or at least locally is that he quit on the team, and that, nobody on the team liked him. He was doing his own thing. He was a malcontent, but nobody is reacting like that in the locker room about him. So that tells me, that dissonance there tells me that there is something more to that story than what we know from, sitting here on Twitter, right? Clearly the people in the locker room do not feel the same way that the people on Twitter feel about Odell Beckham, and I think that's because they probably have more information. But yeah, man, it was one of the most puzzling things to see that a coach as competent as Kevin Stefanski just refused to figure it out with Odell Beckham. And I think part of that's on Baker, right? I think Baker tried, but I think Baker wanted to do it his way. I think Odell wanted to do it his way. And they just, again, they were all pulling in different directions and never in the same one ever in this season. I think that kind of just started the domino effect on the offensive side of the football to what we saw.
You said it earlier. You kind of convinced me that it must have been Kevin Stefanski trying to believe that my offense is better than one player. Like, he just kind of refused to bend the knee. And we saw Sean McVay over and over again say, like, we're going to get Odell involved. We're going to give him targets. Praising Odell. Kevin Stefanski never did that. Like you said, he kind of missed out on the human element of that relationship, and it really cost him.
Yeah, I think Kevin's one of those guys that really believes in the system, right? And a lot of those Shanahan guys are like that, where they run that offense. It is a offense. It's about the system. But I think what separates people who replicate the Shanahan system from the Kyle Shanahans of the world is that awareness of your personnel, both positive and negative, right? I don't know if you're a big Jimmy G fan, but I'm gonna just let it out the back. I think Jimmy G is a lemon. I think I don't think he's a terrible quarterback, but I don't think he's what people are saying that Jimmy G is. And I don't know what it is with Jimmy, but I think he's been carried a fair bit in San Francisco by the Shanahan offense. And I think that's because Shanahan is aware of what he does have on offense and what he doesn't, right? If he does not feel like Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be able to do anything for him, he just won't throw the ball. You know what I mean? Like, Shanahan's just willing to turn it all the way off. Like, and that's one of the things with Kevin. I'm like, okay, whatever is happening with Baker, he's playing awful. Why are we throwing the ball with him 40 times? You know what I mean? Like, why are we still trying to do the same stuff with him when he's been awful? You know, and we can put it on the shoulder, whatever. When he's been out there, he's been bad. And you look at the Pittsburgh game, you look at the Green Bay game, he was unspeakably bad in both those games. And it was still, hey, we're going to throw the ball, we're going to push the ball, we're going to push the pocket. And it's like, you know, you got to be aware of what you have. Another part of that is, you know, just the Andy Reid thing, or Matt Stafford at the end of the Super Bowl, right? Matt Stafford did not care about no double coverage. He didn't care about anything. He said, I got one baller. That's Cooper Kupp. I'm getting him the ball. That's what I'm going to do. Cooper's getting the ball, or I'm throwing an interception. That's what it's going to be. That's what the Super Bowl is going to be on, right? And with Kevin, you know, he never goes, all right, David's having a great game. David Njoku's having a great game. Let me go get the ball to David. You know what I mean? Let's just get David involved, or let's get Odell involved, or let's get Jarvis involved. Let's make our playmakers play. You know what I mean? He never goes into a game really thinking that. Sometimes with Nick Chubb, he'll be like dead set on running the ball, but never with any of the receivers. He did it like one time. It was with Odell in the Dallas game that they had 2 years ago, where Odell had like 3 touchdowns. Right? Never really went back to that idea, right? And, you know, it's one of those things that, look, he's a second-year coach at the end of the day. He's super young. You hope that he learns from it, you know, and takes that into next year and understands that, hey, you know, when you have star players, sometimes you got to throw the system out the way and just get them the ball, right? Because that's your best play, is getting your best player the ball. It ain't always about what you can design. Is about just getting the ball there. And the same thing goes for Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield likes to spread the ball out. Baker Mayfield likes to, you know, divvy up his targets and divvy up his receptions with guys. And sometimes you just got to get the ball to your playmakers, right? Like sometimes you do just got to force. You know, I know that was a big worry. He's going to force the ball to Odell. Oh, no. What a problem that is, right? Like, oh, no, because Matt Stafford didn't just force the ball to Cooper Kupp to win a Super Bowl, right? Or force the ball to Megatron. You know, it's sometimes when you have a guy that good, you just got to force the ball to him. This is what Josh Allen did at the start of 2020. It was like, okay, Stephon Diggs is really good. I'm just going to throw it to him. He's going to be open. Joe Burrow, forcing the ball to Jamar Chase. Yeah, it's not that bad of an idea. So, you know, sometimes you just got to get the ball to your playmakers. And with Kevin and with Baker both, I think they have a hard time understanding that, like, the playmaker ain't going to be their scheme or their ability to see the field as a quarterback, especially Baker, because he's not very good at seeing the field as a quarterback. We've known that for quite a while with him. Like, he's not the best guy when it comes to diagnosing defenses, knowing where guys are going to be. Baker's, like, really good at, if you need to get the ball to a window, you tell him to get the ball into a window, he'll fit the ball into a window. That's what he's good at. But when he has to, like, rely on his processing, we know that he's not great at that. So don't worry about that sometimes, you know. Take the pressure off of you and just get the ball to a playmaker. But it seems like there is significant tension on doing that, both from the quarterback and from the coach. So I don't know how realistic it is for me to expect it.
No, sometimes you have to know when your player is better than your scheme. I have a friend who coaches in college, and they had a receiver who was just like NFL speed, like ran like a 4.4, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. You could double cover him, but it doesn't matter because they'll just run by both guys. And you're like, well, on paper, if you draw it up on a whiteboard, he's double covered, don't throw to him. But in real life, in practicality, he runs right by both guys and is wide open deep. And you say, sometimes you got to throw out the playbook and just go get the ball to your best player. I'm curious because a lot of people talk about Baker last year and are saying, well, the injury is why he played so bad, blah, blah, blah. I think you and I kind of have an agreement that, well, you put a lot of bad stuff on tape. But I would respond to those people by saying, if he was really hurt so badly that it was affecting his play, he probably shouldn't have played. So I think it's just kind of a bad argument that people make when they're like, well, he was hurt, so that's why he played bad. Then he, like, ruined his career. The opinion of him and his finances are going in the toilet because I guess he played hurt. If that's really what happened, do you agree with that assessment, that if he was really so hurt that he played terribly, he probably shouldn't have played at all?
Yeah, I mean, like, if everything that he did bad this year were due to that shoulder, I would agree. Like, yeah, he probably shouldn't have played. The problem is, like, a lot of the bad stuff he did this year really had nothing to do with stuff that you would, like, a traditionally task with it being about the non-throwing shoulder labrum, right? Like, if he was just inaccurate every once in a while, and it's hard to gauge whether his inaccuracy is because of the shoulder or not, because you've watched a lot of Baker Mayfield. He has sporadic moments of just wild inaccuracy, right? And whenever I hear JT O'Sullivan, he has a great channel on here. He did a nice breakdown, and he's talking about Baker's feet being terrible, right? Like, a lot of people talk about how bad his feet are. We've been talking about how bad Baker's feet have been for like 3 years. He's never tried to do anything about it. They've asked him if he wanted to do a quarterback coach or go have a quarterback coach in the offseason to fix the feet. He said, nah, I don't need to fix anything, right? So he doesn't think it's a problem, but everybody who watches him play says, yeah, the reason he gets sporadically inaccurate for a guy who can fit balls into tight windows as often as he can, the reason he has these moments of inaccuracy is because his feet are terrible. And he doesn't do anything about that. And it's like, when we know that the feet have been an issue with him, and that's been a source of his inaccuracy, and we see bad feet, we can't then say, oh, it's the shoulder, and he had more than the shoulder injury, right? He had a toe injury, like a bunch of different injuries. He was banged up, but guys are banged up at every position. It's just we talk about the quarterback position the most. And it's like, I've seen these issues before with Baker. Like, if this were new stuff, maybe I would buy that argument that it's about the shoulder and like these problems won't pop up again. But we said the same thing in 2019 that, hey, he's never going to have a bad season like that again because there's no way he could be in a worse situation than Freddie Kitchens, right? Like, that was the whole argument for excusing 2019. He gets the coach of the year in 2020. He looked really good. And then in 2021, still has the same coach, but looked bad. And now it's the injuries. And it's like, how many times are we going to run into excuses for this guy being inconsistent before we just accept that he's inconsistent and there are reasons he's inconsistent outside of what we want to blame it on or what's convenient to blame it on? Like, yeah, the labrum did affect him. I do think he was worse because of the labrum. I don't think that justifies how bad he got during the year. I think he knows that that's not a good excuse for why he played as bad as he did. And I think the team knows it. And let's be real here, right? When he wasn't healthy enough to play, the team sat him down. They did not let him play against Stanford. They put Case Keenum in. So when he played, he was cleared. Like, it wasn't a situation where they were forcing him out there. When he played, it was of his own decision making. And I understand people have the idea that like the coach is supposed to hold him back, but coaches said he looked fine in practice, right? Physically, at least. Like, that didn't seem like that was the issue. So, I don't think we could just sit here and just blanketly say that it was just the labrum, because there's a lot of things that just don't suggest that.
The Browns are a team that's ready to win. Like, can you imagine if they had Matt Ryan at quarterback? I think they'd win a lot more games. Kirk Cousins even I'd feel better about than Baker Mayfield. What do you want? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, what do you want your team to do?
Make the playoffs.
Yeah, so you think Kirk would like save him. So what do you want him to do at quarterback? Do you want him to get someone to compete with Baker, trade Baker, what?
They got to do something, right? They got to do, because one thing with Baker Mayfield is the floor, right? I've said this for a while. The ceiling is not a problem with Baker Mayfield, right? When Baker's playing good, he's playing good enough, right? That he's not like the best quarterback in the NFL, but he's definitely like good enough to win with, right? Like, he's at that Matt Stafford kind of level where it's like, hey man, he'll have some hot games, he'll have some okay games, but he's not gonna be a burden on your playoff chances or on your Super Bowl hopes when he plays good. The problem is that when he's bad, he's awful. Like, he's not just bad, he's awful. And it can get out of control, right? Like, if you look at PFF grades and QBR, if you point out the games in each that say that he has sub-starting games, if you look at the 2019 year in the 2021 years where he was bad, it was like 11-10 starts that are below a starting level. If you look at the good years he's had, 2018 and 2020, it's only like 6 starts that were bad below a starting level. And that's on par with like a guy like Russ. I think the Browns, like, if an upgrade's available, if you feel like you can get to the Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins, yeah, make the move. I don't think there's much to worry about moving up off. I have questions. Like, if Kirk Cousins came here, I know we would make the playoffs. I don't know what we would do in the playoffs, but I know we would make the playoffs, right?
Here's my question, if I may. Would you make a Matthew Stafford level trade where you're like, we'll give you 2 firsts and Baker for Kirk?
Oh, For Kirk?
I know that sounds insane, but would you do that? If you thought that would get you to a Super Bowl the same way the Rams did, would you make that trade? Because undeniably, the Browns roster is incredible. Like, they're ready to win. They just need the quarterback. Would you trade your future and your quarterback for Kirk Cousins?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one, too, because Kirk's getting up there in age, too. He's like, what, 34?
So Stafford.
Some guys really...
How bad do you want that Super Bowl?
That's what I'm saying. Like, if I just... See, that's a good comparison, though. Him and Stafford, they're pretty similar.
Kirk's numbers are better, actually.
Yeah.
If you look at Kirk's numbers historically, like, they're actually like slightly better. Which numbers aren't everything. Good.
And his help has been worse. If you look at it, people don't understand. But Kirk, the last 4 years, has not had an offensive line that ranked higher in PFF and pass blocking than like 27th.
And what do the Browns have? A great offensive line.
Yeah, so you can kind of suggest that would be, I don't know, but the idea of trading 2 firsts for Kirk Cousins, like. You know what I mean?
It's just bad PR.
That's a tough pill to swallow. Hey, that's one of those situations where you could be right tomorrow, but you're gonna be wrong the day you do it. Like everybody's gonna pan that if you do it, but you might be right. But it's not gonna be great the day you make that trade, right? If it were like somebody like Russ, obviously, oh yeah, heartbeat, you'll do that. Like not even question it, or even Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that. Yeah, of course, you would do that. With Kirk, because if that don't work, you're the team that traded 2 firsts for Kirk Cousins at age 34. Like, I mean, that's the only tough part of that. But do I think the Browns would, if they felt like they could get Kirk Cousins for a reasonable compensation? I think Kevin would want to do it because Kirk is who Kevin wants at quarterback, a guy who's going to take care of the football, not make too many mistakes, not going to do too much, but also not going to do too little. That's exactly what Kevin wants. And Baker kind of has some tendencies that are in opposition of what Kevin wants to do because Baker's a gunslinger. He wants to throw the ball downfield. Kevin don't want to risk it, So it's an interesting proposition. I don't know. I got to think about that. 2 firsts for Kirk Cousins, though.
What I hear you. It sounds crazy, but I don't think the Vikings want to get rid of him. So you got to convince them to do that. And this just popped in my head. I'm like, well, could you compare that to Stafford? And I think it comes down to when you look back. 5 years from now, you look back on this Browns team, which is we both agree it's like a really good football team, and you're a quarterback short. Would you rather say we tried everything we could and didn't work? Or we were too afraid to take the risk and trade 2 first-round picks, which may or may not work out, to get the guy that might put us over the top to win a Super Bowl. I would way rather them put all their chips on the table the same way the Rams did. It's just how much confidence do you have in your team around Kirk? And I'll say this, man. Again, I'm not really. I feel like I'm making it sound like I think it's a great idea. I think it's like a mediocre, like 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10 idea. But I would love to see Kirk Cousins play with a good offensive line, which we haven't seen in a long, long time. So
it's
I'm like, man, I don't know.
First year in Washington that he had a good offensive line, but yeah, it's an interesting proposition there because you could make the argument that Kirk is going to be a much better. Like Kirk is a better quarterback than Baker Mayfield. Like right now, absolutely. Like Kirk Cousins much better.
And he's better than most people available. Like, who else is available? Mitchell Trubisky, Case Keenum. Like, what are your options? If you don't get Russ or Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson, which I don't think either of them are an option, it's like Matthew Stafford is really expensive and probably not going to get moved, or Kirk Cousins, maybe if you can convince them to make that trade. Who else is available? I don't think anyone else is. And the Browns have a quarterback problem. And I'm sorry, but Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, they're not going to solve that problem. They're just not. So
yeah, at least not this year. You know what I mean? They're not those kind of prospects. Yeah, I mean, like with Kirk. Oh man, that's just that's a gamble. It is a gamble, but it is the best possible gamble. You could also probably throw Derek Carr in there. Derek Carr's probably just as shaky, right? He's
They're
little
not
bit
moving
younger.
him though. Good luck getting him out of there.
Who knows? It's the Raiders. They will do something.
So same proposition. I mean? 2 firsts and Baker Mayfield for Derek Carr. Would you?
Are they going to take Baker?
Yeah, they're going to take Baker.
Derek Carr? I would consider that. I would strongly consider that.
You would rather have Derek Carr than Kirk Cousins?
I think that Derek Carr has been in worse situations than Kirk and gotten more out of them than Kirk. And I think that I trust Derek Carr at the end of games a level more than I do Kirk. I don't think Derek will put up better numbers over a year than Kirk. Like if Kirk Cousins came here, he will have like MVP type numbers if he came here and just played in the Browns offense and just, they drafted a wide receiver and just threw that there with him and then boom. I think you'll have like an MVP level statistical year. Nobody's going to vote for him, but like he'll be in the conversation. If Derek Carr came here, I think I would have more confidence at the end of games, right? That's my worry with Kirk. Are we going to trade 2 first-round picks for like a fourth quarter interception in the wild card round? You know what I mean? Like it gets like that with Kirk, right? Like because when it gets shaky with him, he starts to panic. You see his feet chopping. He got that Jimmy Garoppolo in him, right? When you knew Jimmy was going to throw a pick at the end of the game because you saw how choppy his feet started to get. You're like, oh, he's jumpy. He's going to throw an interception. Like we all know when that's going to happen. With Derek, that doesn't happen to him. So I would be more confident in that. Also, he's younger, right? So you don't worry about – because, like, sometimes guys play till they're 40 in the NFL. And then you have Joe Flacco's and Andy Dalton's who went from starting quarterbacks to relative, like, backups, like, in a year, right? Like, when they turned 32 each, they just fell off a cliff, right? So you don't know which one you're getting with that. Kirk at 34 – I'm a little bit nervous about it. I would be less nervous about Derek Carr at 30 because I know that Derek's going to be better in them fourth-quarter situations. I think Derek would benefit from being in a situation with the Cleveland Browns where you're going to have a good defense, you're going to have a really good offensive line, you're going to have a great run game, and you're going to have good support. And you're in a system that accentuates the strengths of Derek Carr, which is he has great arm talent. He's not going to be the most risky guy with the football. He's going to take some check downs, and we have elite check down guys for Derek Carr. So I would be more comfortable about it with Derek Carr just because, I don't know, there's less of a stigma with him as well.
Well, so Kirk legitimately, in my opinion, has like an anxiety problem where in big moments, I think he tenses up rather than being that kind of guy with swagger who's relaxed. Kirk is a nerdy Midwest dude. Derek Carr, like, actually legitimately has swag and, like, is comfortable and confident and cool and relaxed. And I'd feel better about Derek Carr running my football team than Kirk Cousins. And by the way, I'm curious. I hate saying the name Kirk Cousins. No shade, no offense to him. But, like, it just does not come out of the mouth very easily. Am I wrong about that? Like, Kirk Cousins is just a clunky name.
It's one of those names that you could use for like comedic effect too. It's like, come on, Kirk Cousins. Like, it's just real funny to say Kirk Cousins in a way. It's like he's Kirk Cousins. Like, that's what you get. He gonna go Kirk. Captain Kirk. Like, his nickname is hilarious. Like, it's just like, you ever have one of those guys like you meet at work and like an office scenario and they have a name and it just feels real good to say like shut up plus their name. It's like, shut up, Kirk. That just feels good. You know what I mean? Like, it just don't make sense, but it just feels good to just be like, oh yeah, here come Kirk Cousins. Like, it's just a funny name. And Derek Carr, like you don't hear as many of the jokes with him. But it's the same thing with Matthew Stafford, right? Like, Matthew Stafford was the king of like, oh, he's good. Look, Matthew Stafford going to have 3 games where you don't believe he's Matthew Stafford no more, but he will remind you at some point. That's Matthew Stafford, right? Like, not like he's terrible, but Matt's going to have those stretches where he has like 3 great games. And you're like, yeah, he's top 5. And then he has like a 2-pick-6 game. You're like, oh yeah, I forgot Matt does this too.
Yeah, that Titans game was brutal. Did you watch the Titans-Rams game this year?
Oh, yeah, he had a couple of them. He had like 3 of them in a row this
passes,
year, right?
Man, yeah. He threw a pick 6 and then another interception like on back-to-back passes, and you're like, Jesus Christ, like, what is happening with this guy?
That's been Matt Stafford his whole career, though. It's like, and people forget, and I think it's going to get rewritten because he won the Super Bowl. Good on him, right? He's going to probably get into a Hall of Fame because of that. But, people forget. I get people on Twitter telling me he was top 5 or top 7. I was like, when Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, like when legitimate superstars were in the league, you telling me he was top 5 in that era? No, that's ridiculous. Like, Matt Stafford has always been the dude that, like, you kind of worry about him messing it up. at the end of the day.
That's why I would say
the Rams were worried about
in
the third quarter of that Super Bowl was Matt Stafford messing it up, because there's nothing that explains them running the ball for inches of grass with Cam Akers, not getting nothing all game. Sam Hubbard's been in their backfield all game, but Sean McVay don't want to throw the ball because he knows that there's not enough wide receiver play out here to save him. So he's like, man, let me not have Kirk Cousins happen to me. Not Kirk Cousins. Let me not have Matthew Stafford have one of them Matthew Stafford games. You know what I mean? No disrespect to him. It's just, you got to worry about that because he's more than capable of throwing that thing up. He had, 2 interceptions. They weren't bad interceptions in the Super Bowl, but they were still just like, it's just, it was tough. But, Matt Stafford's going to throw you an interception. I get nervous if I had Matt Stafford on my team and he had not thrown an interception in a while going into a big game, because that tells me he's due. I get the same feeling with Baker Mayfield. I'm like, man, he ain't thrown an interception in like 8 weeks and we go into a playoff game. I'm worried because I know that he's going to throw an interception. Like, it's one of those things. You're going to regress to the mean eventually.
It's when, not if. Well, that's what I say. I think trading for Kirk Cousins is equally crazy as trading for Matthew Stafford. Like, if you look at it and you fail with Matthew Stafford, can you imagine the criticism they would have gotten if he, against the Buccaneers had 4 interceptions and they lost, or 2 pick sixes or something crazy, and you're like, you really traded away your quarterback and 2 first-round picks, your future, for Matthew Stafford, and it didn't work out. It's the same proposition with Kirk Cousins. Like, it's equally, quote, crazy if it doesn't work, but it did work. And maybe it could work for the Browns. I don't know what else the Browns are going to do, and Kirk really might be their best option.
I would say the one difference between Kirk and Matt is, like, when Matt has a meltdown, it's not because it's the fourth quarter. You know what I mean? Like, it's just because he's having a terrible game. Like, it starts out bad, it ends bad, it just is bad, the whole thing, right? So you don't think his issues are fourth quarter related. That's the same thing with Derek Carr. Derek Carr is more than capable of having a meltdown too, right? People just don't know about it because they ain't been paying attention about the Raiders. But he will have some bad games throughout the year, right? But they're not bad games because he was in a clutch situation. They're just bad games. The thing about Kirk is when he has bad games, it's like because he's on prime time, or it's like it's the fourth quarter and he tried to do too much and then he started forcing it. Like, that worries me more with Kirk, where I'm like, why do these things happen?
The amount of crucial interceptions kill me, man. We're Kirk Cousins. 4th down, end of the game, you got the ball, down 4, chance to win, pick 6, and you're like, of course. Yeah. How many times that happened?
It's happened a lot with Kirk. It's happened a lot with Baker, right? Well, not with the pick sixes, but where he's thrown a last drive interception, right? I think, the shocking thing to look at it when you look at the fourth quarter splits, Kirk Cousins looked like Tom Brady's next to Baker Mayfield's trailing and behind fourth quarter. Like, honestly, they're bad splits for Baker Mayfield there. I was unaware of how awful it was until I saw it. So, you got a problem there. It's like it would be less of a problem than what you have with Baker Mayfield at the end of those games. But it's still going to be an issue. Again, Kirk Cousins, I would feel great. Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. The Browns would probably be favorites to win the division. They would definitely be in the playoffs, probably get to the divisional round. But after that, I would have major concerns about, how far they can go with Kirk Cousins. Derek Carr, I feel like if you get him here and he plays well enough for you to get to the playoffs, probably can get to the Super Bowl with him, right? You probably unlock something there.
Let me rationalize it further. I'm sorry to double down, but I have to. So you trade 2 firsts and Baker for Kirk Cousins. If you trade 1 first for Kirk, you're still going to be a good football team. So the next 2 draft picks are probably going to be late first-round picks anyway. So let's assume you're giving up the 23rd through 32nd round, overall pick. I don't know why you wouldn't give up 2 of those to get Kirk Cousins. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is it's going to solve a lot of their problems. And if you think about what are you really giving up? It sounds bad, but oh no, you gave up the 27th overall pick and then the 30th overall pick, and you didn't win a Super Bowl, but you got a great quarterback and you went a lot farther than you would have anyway. Am I making sense?
Oh, you make sense, but you forget this team's in Cleveland, man. Like things just go wrong. That's what we have to factor in, right? If we trade for Kirk Cousins, the logical thing is that's what's going to happen. But it could also be that he just falls off a cliff. He's terrible, and we gave away the first overall pick for Kirk Cousins. That's why I say. Oh
no, you're right. You're totally right, though.
Yeah, and this is why I say if I'm Andrew Berry, you got to be aware of that when you go into these trade negotiations. Because look, man, a first round pick from us ain't the same thing as a first round pick from Pittsburgh because you playing the lottery with the Browns Browns first round pick. This first round pick might get you 30 in 2023. It might get you Bryce Young. You know what I mean? Like, it could be either way. So one of our first round picks are worth two of any other franchise's first round picks, because like it can just go wrong. Like, you know, with Kirk Cousins, I do not put it above Kirk Cousins to fall into the hole that has been bad luck in Cleveland and just end up falling off a cliff. Like, that's why the age worries me with him a bit more. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, it's Cleveland. Like, it could go bad in a certain amount of ways, and you have to be aware of that. And that's where I'm nervous. It's like, man, that Kirk Cousins trade could be a disaster. And since it's Kirk Cousins, it will never be a disaster that people forget. You make that trade for Derek Carr, people will be like, oh, you took a chance on a young guy. You make that trade for Kirk Cousins at 34 and he fall off a cliff, you're going to be the idiots that traded for a 34-year-old Kirk Cousins and gave away like 2 top 10 picks for the rest of your life. You know what I mean?
Can I ask you a tough question? Like, I mean nothing against it, but I can ask you, is that a bit or is that real? Like, is there really an attitude in Cleveland of like, well, we're the Browns, like, you never know? Is that really like a real thing?
Yeah,
because I don't think the Patriots certainly aren't like, well, no. You know, the Patriots. Nobody thinks that way other than maybe Cleveland and Detroit, the poor Lions fans.
The teams that have seen things not go their way year after year. Like, you know, I think what the Cowboys fans are one of two flavors, right? They're either overconfident or they're like this, right? Like they're like, oh man, we always lose. Like, it's either one of those two flavors. But yeah, you know, it's like we do factor that in because, you know, we get nervous when the team has high expectations because we've seen it go wrong so many times. Like the Browns in 95, right? It goes back all the way to that. 95, they were supposed to be Super Bowl contenders. We had Bill Belichick and Nick Saban on the same coaching staff. You know, we just signed Andre Rison. Like, you know, we got the team of the decade, people are saying on Sports Illustrated. And then the season ends with the team being moved to Baltimore. Like, things just go wrong here sometimes, right? And you know, I think that's why a lot of people, when they see the success that Joe Burrow is having in Cincinnati and they see what he is doing and like how things have gone wrong around him, why they wish they could have gotten somebody like that, because things just go wrong around Joe Burrow and it just seems like it's just fine with him most of the time. But in Cleveland, like, you know, if you're going to be the quarterback here, it's going to go wrong. Like, something's going to go wrong at some point. Like, that just is what it is here. Like, stuff goes wrong all the time. Odell gets traded here. He gets put in a terrible system, tears his ACL, you know, and it never ends up going the way you thought it would. Things just going to go wrong. You have to have a special mindset to be able to work with that, right? I think it's the same way in Philly where you just kind of adjust for that. Like, okay, things are going to go wrong. Things aren't going to go my way. How do I handle that? And again, when we talk about the two different quarterbacks we talking about here, who do you think's more equipped to handle when things go wrong? Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, or Baker Mayfield? I would say Derek Carr in that conversation. Baker Mayfield has a tendency to let the chaos run over him because he gets too consumed with it. And, you know, it's just a thing here in Cleveland, man. Stuff's going to go wrong at some point. We have bad luck. Like, it is what it is. But we just need somebody who just doesn't care. You know what I mean? And sometimes we get wrapped up into it. You can, like, I don't know if you've ever been to a Browns game at the stadium. But I encourage you to go because, like, wait till you go there. You'll feel what I'm talking about once there's a terrible penalty called, like in the first quarter. You'll just feel that energy in the stadium. I can't really describe it better than that, but you'll just be standing there like, oh, I feel the avalanche of bad about to happen. Like, and I can't stop it. You know what I mean? Because it's something there. You know, I don't think it's like anything supernatural. I just think it's just the burden of losing that much that happens there. But yeah, it's just something where you just worry about that going wrong because when you're Cleveland Browns fan, you're used to things not going your way. And instead of looking at the Kirk Cousins thing logically or how the best case scenario, you have to keep an eye on how can this blow up in my face? You know, when you open enough stink bombs, you check the package. That's all I'm saying.
Two things, man. First of all, Derek Carr, look at how wrong things went last year in Vegas, and they still made it to the playoffs. Like, Derek Carr clearly can handle anything. Two, it sounds like it's an entire fan base of people that just have PTSD. I feel so bad for you guys, and I can't blame you either. That's a sad thing. It's like I actually totally get it. If I'm a Browns fan, I would be like, yeah, we're probably going to screw this up.
It's like you hope they don't screw it up, but it's like, okay, how can this go wrong? Like you got to look at it like, because I know like when Patriots fans get a hold of Randy Moss, they say, how can this go wrong? And legitimately mean that, because we're the Patriots, we have Tom Brady, and we just got Randy Moss.
How could this go wrong? And
how could it go wrong?
No, really, how could this go wrong? Like Browns fans are like, no, how is it going to go wrong? Like,
yeah, when you're a Brown fan, like you have no choice but to be skeptical of this, because it's like, this can go wrong. Like we have the ideal that it can't go wrong. That's been busted from us from a very young age. We've seen it go wrong. We know it can go wrong. It's like, what can happen to make it go wrong? Like, is everything in line? Like, you're just constantly checking things. Is this right? All right, we got that right. And 2021, I'm not going to lie, made it worse because we did all of that. We checked. We're like, the quarterback had a really good run at the end of the year. He did it in the playoffs. All right, he's cool. All right, in line, cool. Pieces, cool. All right, Odell, that could be something that go wrong. And that was part of the tension all years. People were looking at Odell like that's going to be what goes wrong with his offense before he did anything, good or bad. And all that pressure was on him. And then, stuff went wrong. You know what I mean? Like, it just fell apart.
Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy, though, too, where the fan base gives they give OBJ a ton of crap and they give Baker a ton of crap, and think it pulls him down?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely happened with Odell this year, where it's just like, so much of the pressure. I don't even think it was just locally. So much of the pressure with Odell coming back wasn't about whether he could come back and play well, right? Like that wasn't what we were talking about. It was this ideal or this conversation of if him coming back, period, was going to hurt the team. Like, could you imagine that? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you were in that situation and you're trying to rehab and all anybody is talking about is how you gonna hurt the team by working hard to come back.
That's toxic, man. That's really toxic.
Yeah, that's not a good situation. And look, I know people, like athletes, don't want to pay attention to these things at some time, but it leaks in. And if people don't think that conversation, right, that constant push of, Baker might be better without Odell, didn't get into the heads of some of the principal characters and a lot of the drama that happened in Cleveland Browns season, they're kidding themselves, right? Like, I think Odell had it in the back of his head that he could be the problem here, right? And he felt like the problem here. And I think Baker had it in the back of his head that Odell was the problem. I think the coaching staff had it in their back of their head. Maybe Odell's the problem, right? And it became this whole thing. We're like, okay, Odell comes back. The offense isn't looking good. Instead of being like, hey, let's get the ball to Odell more, they're thinking maybe it's Odell. Maybe we need to put Anthony Schwartz in more. And when you Odell Beckham and they're putting in Anthony Schwartz over you to run a play designed for Anthony Schwartz, that's got to be disrespectful, right? Like that's not going to be seen well. It's just a lot of things went into that situation, but I think that perception and that basis of it, like we weren't talking about Odell coming back and whether he could play well. We were talking about Odell coming back and whether he was going to hurt the team, and that was a conversation I felt like was never going to have a positive end unless the coaching staff really was aware that conversation was out there and that they needed to make sure and nip that in the bud, right? If Andy Reid has a situation like this where they're like, the team's better without Tyreek Hill, you know what Andy Reid's going to do? Throw the ball to Tyreek Hill a million times to prove a point, to be like, hey, man, get off Tyreek's back. You know what I mean? That's just kind of what great coaches do. They're aware of things that might be lingering, mindsets that might be lingering in the locker room, and they try to nip those things in the bud by, giving those things less fuel to talk about. And I think Kevin had a learnable moment this year where he knew that stuff was in the air, but he just kind of ignored it and tried to not pay attention until it got to the point to where he had to release one of the better wide receivers in football.
The one thing we haven't talked about yet from last year is that, it's a team with Super Bowl expectations. I thought they were going to go 13-4, win their division. Injuries really hurt this football team. Like that, if there's one thing that went really clearly wrong last year, it's that, Jedrick Wills gets hurt. People got hurt early on, and it really derailed a lot of stuff they were doing. In your opinion, how did injuries affect this football team?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the underrated things about this team is that the injury of our backup swing guy, Chris Hubbard, was one of the biggest injuries of the year because he plays guard, both sides, and he plays tackle both sides. He's the backup for like 5 different positions. And he went out, and Jedrick went out, and that left us with dudes off the practice squad being the left tackle for a while there. Conklin went out basically for the whole year. It's like 5 different injuries, but he would come back for like 3 plays and then get hurt again and then come back and then get hurt right in the first quarter again. So he was basically out for the year. I think he played like 1 full game this year. And, you know, the injury at tackle definitely played a factor in it. And I think what really made this thing go off the wheels was the Hubbard injury. And I could say that because last year they had a bunch of injuries on the offensive line, but not at the same time and same position. And they had Hubbard, so they could just plug him in at whatever position that they needed to. And he would be competent. But not having him meant that you had to go to replacement level players for like multiple positions on the offensive line. And, you know, the interior is great, but it takes 5 on that line to really do anything. And they just didn't have 5 a lot of the time on that offensive line.
Well, even like when Jedrick Wills did play, he was playing hurt. Like you could see, I mean, he would go in and out of games, and like he was trying, but similar to Jack Conklin, like there was no way Jedrick Wills was 100% at all, really, the entire year last year.
Yeah, he had the ankle injury. It really hurt him, I think, at the start of the year. I think at the end of the year, he looked fine. But at the start of the year, yeah, he couldn't even get to his 3rd or 4th step. That was a situation where I'm like, all right, he legitimately doesn't need to be on the football field. And then they took him off the football field after that game, right? Where I think it was the Arizona game where it's like, okay, he can't get upfield right now. He needs to not play, and they took him out for a couple of weeks.
That's right. He got dominated by, I think, Chandler Jones, or maybe that was a Titans game. There was some game where the Cardinals just went off, and I think
it was the Browns. Yeah, it was either the Browns. It was either that game or the game we had against the Patriots. Both were blowouts. Both were awful. So they kind of mushed together, both in my head. But I think it was the Cardinals game where I was watching Jedrick. I was like, okay, he can't even get to his 3rd step. He's not, and there's no use of having him out there.
I've reached the end of my notes about the Browns, but can I ask you a question about you as a content creator? Because you're self-employed, like you're a full-time content creator. I've got nothing but respect. I know how hard that is to do that. Can we talk about you as a creator a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
So I tell a story. When I was in college, and I'm trying to set you up, I slept under my desk for like 2 years trying to like make content, trying to do as much as I could to make my show grow. What's something you did early on, and like what sacrifices did you make to become a full-time content creator?
See, I've always, like, since YouTube came out in like 2006, I remember I was like 2007 or 8, I was like on the platform, like not making videos like I do now, but I would make like videos in different genres where I'm like, oh, okay, you know, this is back in the day, you just made YouTube videos just for fun, right? You know, it wasn't like this whole career that it is now. I remember like that was before the partner program got rolled out. You like rate 5 stars, but I've always been somebody who has been like on YouTube, watching a ton of YouTube, right? And I got bored one day, made the Colin Cowherd video, and I saw that got traction, and I've seen enough YouTube to know this is my window, right? Like you get those moments in life where you're like, window's open, go through it right now. Like, you know, and I was like, okay, I'm uploading every week at the very least, right? I'm uploading every week. And then those started getting more traction. I'm like, okay, 3 times a week, right? And then, you know, that started to look promising enough to where I was like, okay, I'll save up some money from my day job and just go full time and just see what uploading 5 to 7 days a week, what that would get me, because I did the math on it. And, you know, the numbers worked out, and you know, people wanted more content, so you're able to do more content. You know, the biggest advice I can give to anybody who ever wants to create content is just make it. You know, I think sometimes we get so caught up in the creative process of planning, right, that we get overwhelmed or overwhelm ourselves with, oh, well, now I got to make this video the most perfect video ever, and then I want to do this, and I don't know how to do that, and just you overwhelm yourself when you think about it too much, when at the end of the day, you just got to make a video, man. Like I wanted to react to what Colin Cowherd was saying, so I just made a reaction video basically to Colin Cowherd and what he said, and did that, and it turned out, right? You know, just make the videos that you search for that nobody else made. Make that video. And just do it. Like that's the best advice that anybody can give as a content creator. Is just you just got to do it. And once you do it, it's a lot less difficult than what it means to get there, right? Like I'm pretty sure you've had it when you were playing quarterback, right? Where it's like sometimes the thought of playing quarterback, right, is such an overwhelming thought. You got to know different line protections. You got to be able to identify defenses, coverages, memorize the entire playbook, know every route on every concept that you're going to run, know what the primary read is, know what the secondary is, know what to do. You have to do it all while under pressure, all while only having 3 seconds at most to make that decision. And if you think about it too much, that might be like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to play DN and just hit people. But I'm pretty sure for you, you got to the college level and once you started doing it, once you just started playing quarterback, right? It was a lot easier than thinking about it. And that's what content creation is. Just doing it is a lot easier than thinking about it, because thinking about it, you'll get paralysis by overanalysis. You just won't ever do it. I know so many people who hit me up, hey man, I want to start a YouTube channel. I'm always down to help them out. But then when it comes time to make the video, they're, I'm waiting for this and I'm waiting for that and I'm waiting for that. And I'm like, just make the video, man. Just go out, make it, see if anybody likes it. Nobody likes it. Who cares? Nobody liked it. Like nobody saw it. So it doesn't matter. Just go out there and do it. That's the best advice. People will tell you need to do all this extra stuff before you do it. Just do it and you'll learn. The internet's rough. When I first putting out videos, man, Browns fans hated me, right? They're like, this guy's terrible. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I had to figure it out, right? Like I had to figure it out for myself and adjust. And that's what it's about. You can't get better. You can't adjust if you never do. And that's always the most important part.
Yeah. Just get started, then get better, right? Like as you're going, I've learned so many lessons from, like, if I hadn't ever started, I wouldn't have ever learned those lessons, basically, where you're like, I didn't know I needed to edit this way or do lighting that way. If I never sat down and made a video, I never would have learned the stuff I needed to do. So I think it's great advice, man.
You don't know if you stink if you don't ever try. Like,
true. Yeah. Man, I love talking to you. I had so much fun. Is there anything else you want to say or talk about? I'm open to keep talking, but I just had a great time talking about the Browns and hearing a little bit of your story.
Definitely, man. Let me see if I can think about anything more.
I just try to leave every stone unturned. Go ahead.
What do you think about Perry? How deep have you gotten into the draft talk?
Not a lot, but I can talk a little bit.
All right. There's a player, I'm going to put it out here, and look, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. There's a player, Perrion Winfrey, defensive tackle, had an excellent Senior Bowl for Oklahoma. People are saying he's a second-round pick. I think he's going to be one of the top 15 players in this year's draft. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I feel it in my gut that this dude's going to be really good. I mean, if you watch the tape, he's one of those guys that you don't really got to have the highlight over. You know what he's doing. You know where he's at just because of how he plays. Very physical, explosive guy, just energy out the wazoo. Loves to fight. Like people love Trevor Pennick because of his will to fight. This guy, Perrion Winfrey, does love to fight. But that's my draft crush this year is Perrion.
So that's you calling your shot.
Have you developed a draft crush? Because last year my draft crush was JOK. This year's Perrion. Do you have one, or did you have one last year?
Man, I thought it was Malik Willis. I really loved the guy. The more I've watched his tape, he's incredibly gifted, but he's not as fast as I thought. He's not as big as I thought. Like I was comparing him to Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, and I'm not sure that's a great. Like he's the most talented guy, at the quarterback position in the draft. But I'm like, I don't know. I've been pretty disappointed the more I've watched film on these quarterbacks, and I'm just like, I don't really love any of them. I probably would draft Malik Willis above anybody else, but I think that's maybe my only opinion so far is that I'm pretty underwhelmed, and I'm disappointed at how underwhelmed I am. Like I'm worried that there's not even a starting quarterback next year in this draft class, and I think Malik Willis could become one with enough time to sit and learn, but he's really raw, and then everyone else, like Kenny Pickett, I respect the guy, but he's just very limited, and I'm like, we don't need more Jimmy Garoppolos running around.
Oh, no. With Malik, here's the thing I ask with Malik Willis, because the ideal is like you sit him for like, people say a year. I think he's probably a 2-year sit guy, right?
Yeah.
Like he ain't going to be ready anytime soon. He is raw. I think he needed another year in college. Probably like one of those like transfer situations, but he already transferred. With Malik, with that, knowing that that's going to be the thing, right? Are you better off taking Malik Willis and waiting 2 years? Or are you better off just not drafting anybody and just hoping you can get Bryce Young?
So, like, if you're a bad team, you mean? Like, if you're like Detroit or...
Could you imagine if you're a team that took a chance, like you're Denver or something, right? You took a chance on Malik Willis and you're like, hey, we're going to see what this is in 2 years. And in 2 years, you're about to find out about Malik Willis, but you're also a bad enough team where you have an opportunity to draft. 2 years wouldn't be Bryce Young, but it'd be like Caleb Williams, right? Let's say Caleb Williams is the number 1 overall pick. And he looks like a stud, like a legit stud prospect. But you have Malik Willis on the roster for the last 2 years who you spent a first-round pick on, but you've been developing him, right? It's like the Jordan Love situation, right? Are you putting your team in a better situation by drafting that dude that you might be ready? Like, I'd be honest with you, I don't care how many years I have Malik Willis on the roster. If I had the opportunity to draft Caleb Williams in 2 years, I would take it over that. I think he's just a better prospect right now. And that's the question with Malik Willis. Yeah, he's a decent enough prospect, and he's a wait and see prospect. But unless you have a quarterback right now who you know for a fact you're going to be like a contender for the next 2 years with, you can end up in a real bad situation taking a dude like Malik Willis, because you're going to have a guy that's going to prevent you from taking quarterbacks that maybe you should want to take.
Well, and also, are you going to put him on the field before he's ready? I mean, that's the cardinal sin with that guy is he's just not getting through progressions. Like, I can't really find much film of him getting to his third or fourth read, like working all the way across the field. It's a lot of like, I like what I see or I don't, and I'm taking off. And he's just not processing the game at an NFL level yet. He's physically gifted, but if he goes to Carolina, for example, it's going to be real tempting like week 8 to put him in, and I don't think he'll be ready by then. And that's where I'm concerned is he goes to Washington, he goes to Pittsburgh, he goes to Carolina. I think Pittsburgh would be a great situation. If you go to Pittsburgh, sit behind maybe a Jimmy Garoppolo type quarterback, Tyrod Taylor, someone like that, that's the dream scenario. But week 8 or 9, you're going to want to put him in, and that would be a massive mistake in my opinion.
Yeah, and the thing is that he's like, if you're comparing him to Kenny Pickett and everybody else, like, he's clearly the guy that you would take first, right? But he's not the guy that you need to take first, like, to be successful. Like, you don't want to. The earlier he goes, the worse that is for him, because the higher the expectation is for him to play. Like, he's a dude that needs to be drafted like late in the first round by a team that nobody is thinking is going to take a quarterback, right? Like, that's who, like Seattle or something like that. Like, they got Russ for the next 2 years. They take Malik Willis as a flyer at the end of the first round. That's a team that makes sense for him, because you know for a fact nobody's going to be like, yeah, man, we need to put Malik Willis in over Russell Wilson.
The best fit, the very best place Malik Willis could go, now that I think about it, is Atlanta. Matt Ryan's going to be 37 in, I believe, June. He's 36 now, 37 next year. He's got probably two, maybe 3 years left in Atlanta. They're a mid-first round pick. They'd be a great spot for Malik Willis to go to sit, learn behind a guy, and develop. What are you going to say?
It's a great idea, but also, like, we got to think about other elements. He's going to be wearing number 7 in Atlanta. He's a very athletic quarterback. I think more people would want him to start faster than what people would think. Like, I know they like Matt Ryan, but they really love Mike Vick, right?
Yeah.
And this dude is openly like taking those comparisons, and it only take one preseason game, right, for him to do those things that we seen him do athletically. He's a real twitchy dude where he can make somebody miss, and that's going to intoxicate the fan base. That's going to intoxicate the ownership, and then all of a sudden you trying to we call him the next Mike Vick, and then he's out there in week 8 over Matt Ryan. You know what I mean? Like, he needs to go somewhere where there's no chance he could play in 2 years. And there's also no chance that team in 2 years has a top 10 pick. Because I think infinitely there's going to be better quarterback prospects next year, the year after, and the year after that than there are this year. This is one of those, like, it reminds me of the 2013 draft where, like, E.J. Manuel went first in that draft.
Yeah.
Where it was just nobody.
Yeah.
This is absolutely nobody. You know what I mean? Was that the Geno Smith year?
I think so.
I think that was the Geno Smith year. Yeah, where Geno waited in the – you know how mad you got to be at Geno Smith that you waited in the whole first round? One of the worst drafts in NFL history, and you the dude that slid to the second round? Like,
man. Well, you know – There's two thoughts I have real quick is that, A, if you're a team like Atlanta who's rebuilding and you have a quarterback already. So the best scenario Malik Willis could go to is a team that already has a quarterback. But if you already have a quarterback, you're probably spending a first-round pick on a player that's going to impact your team next year, so you're better immediately. So he's going to go somewhere that needs a quarterback because otherwise you're not going to spend a pick on the guy. The team I would keep your eye on is the New York Giants because we saw Brian Daboll work with Josh Allen. Remember Josh Allen, how incredibly gifted he was in college, but also how incredibly raw he was. And if you're a confident coach, if I'm Brian Daboll, I'm like, I know I can help this guy. I took Josh Allen and turned him into an elite quarterback. I can take a guy with the skill set of Malik Willis and teach him how to play quarterback at a high level. So if you're a confident coach who believes in your ability and you like what he's putting on tape as his athletic ability, his arm strength, stuff like that, then you might see a team like New York with Brian Daboll, who's got Daniel Jones already, so there's no pressure immediately for him to play. They could take Malik Willis, and that would actually be not surprising to me at all if they did that.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be I'm interested to see where he goes and what he ends up doing wherever he goes, because I mean, this is basically what we're talking about. He's the Jordan Love of this draft class, except for Jordan Love wasn't the only quarterback in that draft class, right? There were like a bunch of quarterbacks in that draft, but Jordan Love was the guy who're like, he's super raw, but he has a great arm talent, right? That was the whole argument about Jordan Love coming out of Utah State, was that, hey, man, we don't know what this competition's like, but we know he's talented. And, you know, if you let him sit for a while, and he ended up going to Green Bay, which was as good of a situation for him because he ain't have to play that much. Now, they're at a situation where I don't think that they think that's going to pan out, so they're just trying to keep Aaron Rodgers as long as possible. But that was probably the best spot for him. But the thing with Jordan Love was that he was like the 4th or 5th quarterback in that draft class. This is a draft class in which Jordan Love would have been the number 1 overall pick or something like that. And look, I told you earlier, as a Browns fan, you look for how this can go wrong. I'm seeing a lot of how this can go wrong with Malik Willis, because he's going to be the first guy to go. Once the combine happens, that's going to be a wrap, right? He's going to run like a 4.5, 4.6 or something like that, and it's going to be a wrap, you know, because Kenny Pickett's probably going to run like a 4.7, 4.8, right? You think he's a 4.8 guy, right?
Something like that. I mean, he definitely can run, but not at a high level. He's kind of like he can get out of the pocket if he needs to. He had that long run against whoever they played in like their final game of the year. I think so, yeah. Like he had like a 62-yard touchdown run where he like faked the slide. And by the way, I don't think he was faking a slide. I think he was considering sliding that didn't. I don't think it was like a actual move he made. But, you know, I'm curious because Malik Willis is, oh man, I really, really just, I would love to get in a room with him and try to get his mindset, because a lot of this, for a quarterback working out, it's how hard are they willing to work. Baker Mayfield is a guy who I think at times has been unwilling to take criticism and make changes to his game, where Josh Allen has made so many drastic changes to his game and clearly does a lot of the work in the offseason. I'd want to talk to Malik Willis face-to-face and say, and just kind of get, he'll say the right stuff, but do you believe it when he says it? Is he really a guy who loves the game and is motivated to do the work and the lonely work and the stuff that it takes to get better in the offseason when people aren't watching? Because, like, Dwayne Haskins is posting videos about how he's working out and throwing, but, like, he clearly hasn't been doing enough of the work it takes to play quarterback. Joe Burrow doesn't ever talk about the stuff he does, but he's getting monumentally better. So when you talk to Malik Willis, is he doing the work to get better? That's what I'd want to get from him.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that matters, right? I think with Baker, we get into this, a lot of people get into the conversation, Drew Brees wasn't that great his first 4 years, and then he got better, and it's like, well, Baker Mayfield does not work like Drew Brees. Drew Brees was a maniac. You know, there's stories about him blindfolded, throwing footballs in garages so he can learn passing windows. Like he was again, Drew Brees is going to be one of the most underrated because his whole career was in the shadow of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, he never had that moment where he could just be the guy, but he was amazing. People are always going to sleep on how good Drew Brees was. But yeah, like, Drew Brees was a maniac when it came to that stuff. Baker is not a maniac, right? And you have to find those guys. You know, there's somebody who doesn't get credit for being a maniac that I think has also got a little bit of that, like, I'll do anything to get better at football in him. It's going to sound wild, but I think Jameis is a guy who willing to do anything. I'll get LASIK. You know what I mean? I'll do whatever exercise you tell me to do that's going to make me better at quarterback because that's what I think is going to make me better. I like that trait out of guys. It doesn't guarantee you that the guy is going to be good or make sound decisions. We know that Jameis is capable of throwing 30 interceptions in a season, but it does make you feel more secure, and that's been one of the issues that the Browns have run into with Baker, where it's like, you know, how much work are you really willing to put into this? Like, we're seeing Josh Allen to fix his feet. That's what Josh's problem was, right? Inaccuracy. His feet were terrible. What did he do? He just worked on the feet all summer. At some point, to a point that I feel like Brian Daboll got some of the credit by proxy of Josh Allen working so hard, right? Like, they're like, oh my gosh, what happened for Josh Allen? I'm like, Josh Allen just went maniac mode in the offseason. You know, he just decided he's going to work on everything. And that's awesome, right? With Baker, with other guys, it's not the case. And you really want to know that, right? Because with the dude who's going to need as much work as Malik Willis, you have to, look at his progression from year one at Auburn to year two at Liberty to year three at Liberty, or year one or two. I don't know. He was at Liberty for 2 years and Auburn for one. Look at the progression there. Did he progress significantly? If he didn't, that's a key sign that, like, maybe he don't got that in him, right? Kenny Pickett might be a safer bet to some people because they can see the progression from his third year to his fourth year. I worry because he's been in college forever and he only had the one good year. That's worrisome to me. There's somebody I think is a little bit of a sleeper, Caleb Ellerby, who might be an interesting prospect because if you look at the improvement, he made a huge leap from year 2 to year 3 as a 20-year-old quarterback. And I think he's an interesting prospect.
Where's he play? I've never heard of him.
Western Michigan.
Huh.
He beat
him on my list.
He beat Pitt this year. He beat Pitt at Pitt, I think, with Kenny Pickett out there. They had like a like a high-scoring game there. He has some great numbers out there. Not the most physically impressive guy. Like, he's the same kind of size profile as like a Baker Mayfield, 225 or 205, 6 foot. But some interesting stuff there for him, right? I think he's real underrated in that respect. So he's somebody to look at. But yeah, that's the thing with Malik, right? Like, you got to really get into a room and, like, how dedicated is this dude to getting better? Like, is this dude going to be, like, crazy about getting better? Because that's really the only way that works out for you. If this guy is going to take his success into his own hands and really be a maniac about it, right? That's what Tom Brady is credited for, right? 6th-round pick, 6th-round talent, but, first-round mindset, right? He says, I'm going to get better. That's what I'm going to do. That's what you need to see out of these guys that we look at projects, and sometimes we just get enamored by the tools that we forget to see how the athlete has used those tools and improved those tools over the year. And with Malik, it's like, hey, the tools are intoxicating, right? You see him run in the Senior Bowl, you're like, all right, cool. He's not as fast as you think he would be, but cool. He's quick enough that you can see him running in the NFL. It's just how dedicated is he to getting better? Like, is he going to improve or is he going to hit a wall and never move past it? That's one of the things with Baker Mayfield where we're at with the Browns, where it's like it felt like he hit a wall. He's never made more plays out of structure than he did his rookie year. That's a problem, right? You want to see guys who have that in them. And, that's the biggest thing for Malik Willis. This is the biggest thing for everybody in this draft class. Ain't nobody in this draft class a finished product other than Kenny Pickett, and it's arguable about how finished he is as a product. You know what I mean? I just think people say that because he's been in the same system forever, and he doesn't really have that many physical traits, so we just go to, oh, well, he's a finished product, but, even he's not finished.
There's a guy, I talk about this guy as much as I possibly can. He's my personal, like Caleb Williams is the most exciting quarterback to watch in college football. Absolutely. Like look at that smile. Like, it's amazing. But the guy that I like really, really love and admire and in many ways look up to is actually Keaton Slovis, the guy who transferred out of USC to go to Pittsburgh. This is a guy who, as an 18-year-old freshman, was doing stuff well beyond his years at USC. Got hurt last year, changed coaches, lost his job. Going into last year, Keaton was projected as a number 3 overall pick in this year's NFL draft class. Like, I think he's a guy who's going to explode next year at Pittsburgh, and he's one of those guys who will never broadcast the work he's doing, but he does so much work off the field to get better. And every time I talk to him, I love the guy. I had to give him a shout out. He's my favorite quarterback in college football, him or Caleb Williams. And I just really, really love Keaton and the work he does behind the scenes. And I think he's someone that does not get the respect he deserves for the work he puts in and the talent he has.
Definitely. I gotta check him. Where is he transferring to? Because if he was at
Pittsburgh.
USC, he's got to be going. He's going. Oh yeah, my bad. You just said it. Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a strong USC to Pittsburgh path line for whatever reason. Because wasn't that the same thing that happened with Peterman? Was Peterman Pittsburgh, or they had somebody?
Peterman was Pittsburgh, but Max Brown went from USC to Pittsburgh.
Max Brown. Yeah, that's who.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, in the decision-making process, it's. Pittsburgh was a team that brought back basically their entire offensive line, their entire offense other than Kenny Pickett, and they won their conference last year. Like, they're a really good football team that just needed a quarterback, and you plug in a guy with his skill set. He's a great decision maker. He's really accurate. I just can't wait to see this guy hopefully explode next year in college football and make a name for himself and really get the recognition he deserves. I just really believe in the guy.
Oh, yeah, man. There's a ton of guys in college right now that you're just like, oh, man, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I'm interested to see who takes the chance. What's Georgia's quarterback's name? What's the little guy's name? He's like
Stetson Bennett.
Stetson Bennett. They tried to tell me he was 5'10" on that broadcast. I was like, that's a lie. That is a 5'8". I am 5'8". I know what 5'8" look like. That's 5'8". Like, he is 5'8". But he might put up enough college numbers that somebody's going to give that a look in the NFL. And look, that is going to be worth your Game Pass subscription to watch that in the preseason, because I don't know if we're going to go see it in the regular season. But Stetson Bennett at 5'8", 160 pounds. And the thing about Stetson think he's the best player on the team, man. Like, Stetson has no awareness that he is not, in fact, the best player and athlete at Georgia. So I'm interested to see what happens there. Spencer Rattler's another interesting one, because Spencer Rattler is a maniac. I don't know if you ever seen the QB1 season that he was on, but this dude's a maniac.
Brutal, bro. The way he talked to his backup, do you hear that?
Yeah, I've seen that. Like, this dude's wild. Like, yeah, I bet the team didn't like him, right? Like, you could tell. But I want to see what that's like in the NFL locker room, because he's talented enough. Somebody's going to give him a run. And he come out there as a 6th-round pick talking like Spencer Rattler. That's going to be fun to watch. You know what I mean?
Who's the guy from Last Chance U? Remember Malik Henry? Remember him?
Oh, yeah. With the super dysfunctional coach. Was it John Brown was his coach?
Jason Brown, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was the most dysfunctional football I've ever seen in my... Like, at one point, the coach says, I don't really care about X's and O's. I just get the ball to whoever. I'm like, that is dangerous, dog. Like, you're not even scheming nothing. You're just playing Madden out there. Like, that's wild to me. But that he's gotten that far as a coach, and that's his philosophy. But yeah, that was one of them seasons where I was like, wow, there's nothing healthy about this environment, man. Like, but it is a great season. Like, yeah.
It was such good television. Like, oh my God.
They made that poor kid have to go on like all the he did the car wash at Fox with all the sports shows that they did to justify. It was like, look, man, I ain't as bad as that documentary was making it seem like I was. You know, that was a crazy. I think he ended up. Did he go to Utah State?
Nevada.
No, Nevada. Yeah, he went to one of those schools. Like, but yeah, it's just. Will be a crazy. All these quarterbacks are transferring too. Did you hear what was his name? He went to Bishop Gorman out there in Las Vegas.
Tate Martell.
He finally retired from football in college.
Well, you know what's crazy though is how hard would it be to yourself, right? The world's telling you you're the number one quarterback in the nation. You're getting promoted everywhere. You got a shitload of Twitter followers. Like, you're on top of the world. How can you not? If I don't trust myself at 18 years old to not let my ego get massively inflated in that kind of situation.
Oh, no.
I can almost feel like bad for the guy because the world told him he was amazing. He really wasn't amazing. And then it really messed with his head. I mean, I kind of feel bad for the guy. I know he's not a sympathetic figure, but that's a brutal story. Like, when he's 40 looking back on his life, that's a hard thing to look back on.
Yeah, and it's like with him, it's one of those unfortunate things because like every single structure in his life told him that he was the best thing to ever be born, right? Like that's the vibe that you got from his parents. This is the vibe you got from Bishop Gorman, everybody there. I mean, the kid went to Ohio State. Was they had like one of the craziest recruiting stories in quite a while. People were comparing him back before it was a bad thing. They were comparing him to Johnny Football, like, oh, this is the next Johnny Football. Back when everybody was like excited about that idea, and then it just kind of crashes in on you to the point to where like he's the cautionary tale of the transfer portal, right? I think the transfer portal is great for a lot of people, but it's a tool that you got to be careful about how often you utilize it, because then you can end up in a situation where you never find home. And that's what happened with him. He never found home, right? He jumped from situation to situation anytime that things didn't work out. And look, as somebody who's the exact opposite of that, right? Where I just get into a situation, I figure it out. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to figure it out. Now, that's what I'm more comfortable doing. Like, if I were him, I would have just stayed at Ohio State. Knowing that that's my mindset, I try to be more charitable to somebody who has the exact opposite thought process of me. But that's where I'm like, hey, it can get in trouble either way. I could stay in a bad situation and try to make a bad situation work. And I've definitely done that to myself before. But also, you know, I can see the benefit of just staying a place, right? Because you never know what's going to open up for you, right? Ohio State might have not been the right place for him. But the second move wasn't the right move either, right? Because he was at Ohio State at the same time J.T. Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, and Joe Burrow were there. Like, something ridiculous like that, You know? Maybe I think the ideal of going to being a recruit like him and going to a Houston, going to a Cincinnati, going to a school that's going to be good at football. Maybe they're not the biggest program in the world, but they're going to be good at football. I think that's gotten lost on so many people because everybody wants to go to Alabama. Everybody wants to go to Ohio State. Everybody wants to go to Clemson. Everybody wants to go to like one of these 3 or 4 schools. And I think there's a middle class there that you could do quite well in, right? If you're the quarterback there, and they'll give you that time to grow. And I think he's a dude that needed that time to grow, right? Like, needed that time to mature, needed a place where he could just be home and people could be used to him, right? Like that's another thing, right? When you have a personality that people find great, and you just need to be somewhere for the same place for people to tell you these things about yourself that aren't helping you succeed. Because when you jump around from place to place, you're always getting that like, you know, weird, I don't want to say anything because I just met you kind of energy, instead of like, yo, I've known you for 3 years, you're kind of annoying, stop doing this. This is really getting in the way kind of energy from people. And I just think he never found home, right? And I think that needs to be in the mindset of these parents when they help their kids make these decisions is, okay, yeah, that's like the biggest place that you can go to. But what about here? Like, do you feel comfortable with this coaching staff? You know, a smaller program not going to have turnover with coaching as much as a bigger program. Yeah. Right? You know, you go to a Tennessee, you don't know who's going to be the coach year to year. You go to Middle Tennessee, it's been them schools be having the same coach for like 15 years, right? Like, maybe you can grow in the system. Maybe you can grow up there. Maybe like that's going to be a good, stable environment for you. And that's what he needed. He needed something stable instead of, I'm going to go to Ohio State. Oh, nope, didn't get the starting job. Now I'm going to Miami. Oh, nope, didn't get the starting job. Now, did he transfer somewhere else? And then he ended up at like Arkansas State or something like that? Like, I don't even know where his last stop was. It was so obscure. I was watching like a Thursday night college football game, and he was just there, you know? But it got to such a place where it's like, man, sometimes you just better transferring down to the subdivision level and just like, you know, let me try to be the guy at Montana State or something like that.
That's exactly.
There's no shame in that.
Well, if I may, I'll tell a story. I've never told this story, and I don't want to name a name here, but there's a guy who went from a high-level college program to like a mid-tier FBS still Division I program to then like a Division II college. And the whole time I was telling this guy, because people occasionally when they transfer contact me, they're like, hey, do you got any advice? And I don't tell them where to go, but I help them weigh the options. And I told this guy to look at Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington is a school that they win a ton. They throw the ball a ton. I've got a lot of roots there. I know people that went to school there. Cooper Kupp went there. My buddy Samson Ebukam went there. Like, there's an NFL pathway from Eastern Washington, and you're going to win. You're going to have fun. There's no glamour. It's a small town. But if you, like, only care about football and you want to win, have fun, and develop into an NFL quarterback, like, that's an underrated location that nobody ever talks about. That I just think that, man, like, if you're a guy who – if you truly only care about getting on the field and you're not sure whether or not you're going to get an opportunity, Eastern Washington is a place that does not get enough looks from guys who are transferring. I'm like, man, I would go there.
I'm glad you brought up Eastern Washington and the FCS. I got two things. One, I went to Youngstown State, right? So I'm familiar with the FCS. And it's like, once you, like the bigger conferences in the FCS, like we talk about Missouri Valley football and was it Big Sky and those conferences, the facilities at the better schools aren't up there with like Division I facility. Like they're basically the same indoor facility, all that stuff. They'll have that stuff there. I think people underrate that and kind of like, oh, it's Division II or FCS, and they're like you're playing in like a high school thing. It's like it's a much more not professional, but you know it's up there with the facilities that you think would happen, but. You mentioned that you have roots out there. You talked about Cooper Kupp, man. I don't know if you were close to Eastern Washington when Cooper Kupp was on the team, but
I watched him live a ton.
There was
crazy.
A conference. He was. Yeah, I know he was because there was a national semifinal matchup in Eastern Washington against Youngstown State in Eastern Washington. I think Cooper Kupp's last year there. And that game ended with Youngstown State winning with the craziest catch I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Kevin Rader caught a ball off the back of a linebacker. Kevin Rader's, by the way, tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Shout out to him. But he caught the ball off the back, like hugged the linebacker, caught the ball off of his back, and won the game that way. In Eastern Washington. And I've always wondered how the Eastern Washington fans feel about that moment because that was crazy when I saw it. Like, as a Youngstown, like I was in college at the time cheering for the university when they did that. I was like, oh my God, it's one of the craziest highlights ever.
I'm gonna blow your mind, okay? I was there. I was filming that game. Like I remember that.
Did you get the angle?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for ESPN, like filming those games. I remember I covered a lot of their playoff games. I filmed a Eastern Washington Maine game one time. Like I was really close to that program. I had friends who played there. I went to school at Washington State, which is an hour away. Like I was there all the time. And I mean, I remember we would talk about Cooper Kupp and say like, hey, this guy's going to the NFL, right? Like because he was literally just like destroying people. It wasn't even funny. Like he was like. It was like Jerry Rice. He looked like he does in the NFL. Like he was just dominating people. And I remember that game very well. I think that was 2016, something like that. It was that's pretty wild. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was 2016. I remember because I was in the RA. I was like in charge of like the football floor at the dorm at the time. And one of my best friends, Tierney, her brother's Tevin McCaster. He was the running back for Youngstown at the time. And I remember asking him because he had a good game. I was like, man, how did it feel out there? He was like, it was cold. It was real cold.
I didn't know. I didn't film that game, but I was there. Now that I look back, 2016 would have been before I was working filming. But I was there. I remember that. That's crazy, man.
Yeah, that's wild, man. But I always think about that game. Every time I see Cooper Kupp, I'm like, yeah, Coop. Youngstown State had some interesting victories over that Rams team because also Youngstown State once beat a Pitt team that had Aaron Donald on it. I don't know how that happened, but this is like junior year Aaron Donald. They beat Youngstown State beat Pitt. I was like, who was on that Pitt team that they beat? Aaron Donald? Like, what?
Tyler Boyd?
Tyler Boyd, was he still – I know Tyler because we played.
I thought he was younger than Aaron Donald, I believe.
Yeah. I think he was there. Like, I think he might have been a freshman, but he wasn't like a key. No, he wasn't on the roster.
Tyler Boyd was drafted in 2016 by the Bengals. So if
he came out like his third year.
Yeah, I don't know. I know. I looked at it literally the other day. He was drafted in 2016 because he'd been there. I was looking at how long he'd been in Cincinnati. Like, he didn't have a winning year until this year. His entire career in Cincinnati, which is wild.
That's wild.
I'd love to ask you about something. I have never ever talked about this topic on my show. I've always kind of skirted around it. Like, I talk about how fame corrupts guys, and that's hard to deal with. But the one thing I've never talked about is how you see it a lot. Guys get distracted by girlfriends. They get a girlfriend, and when you're a quarterback, you're not really like a normal guy. I know that sounds wrong, but like, you have different responsibilities than a normal college kid, than a normal guy. Like, Dwayne Haskins going to work is different than a guy in a real estate job or a guy going to a cubicle. Like, you've got a different responsibility. And I just think a lot of these young quarterbacks, college and in the NFL, and I put Dwayne Haskins out there. I don't mean to. There's definitely plenty of examples out there where, like, you see them going to Disney World, going on dates, going to parties, doing this. And I'm like, man, I think that girlfriend's a distraction. And I've been in that relationship where I felt like I called off a relationship because I felt like it was hurting my career. And I was like, I'm just doing too many things that are not working. I got to focus more on what I'm doing. And if you're an NFL quarterback, like, the amount of focus and time it takes to, especially early on, like, by the time you're a mature NFL quarterback and you have mastered NFL defenses, you can really focus on a family. But early on, some of these young guys, I think, get girlfriends in their rookie year, and it really, I think, can be a massive distraction that we don't talk about really as an NFL society, because we don't want to impose and we don't want to cross a line. But I really believe that there are certain guys that can hinder.
Yeah, it's like a fine line, right? Because it's really just a maturity thing, right? Like, for a young dude who's trying to figure out the NFL and figure out just how to play quarterback and adjust, also figuring out, like, just regular life stuff, like, how does your relationship transition from college to, real life with your girlfriend or whatever it is, how's that going to work? Where are you going to, like, all these other things coming in there can also kind of just get in the way. Like, I think, if you're like a 10-year vet and you've been doing this for a while, yeah, you probably know what you need from somebody to be in a relationship and be a quarterback, right? But when you're at the start of your journey, sometimes some people are really malleable and really able to, like, adjust their relationships, and they can have long-term relationships from day one with somebody. And sometimes, some situations aren't as flexible for whatever reason, right? And that's always something to be mindful of. I can't go into somebody's Instagram and, like, try to evaluate the girlfriend. I think that would get, like,
yeah, you can't do that.
Get insane at some levels there. But I do think, like, there is something to it where it's like, hey, how do they handle all of this, right? Like, you're trying to start a family, you're trying to do these things, but you're also not really settled in your career. So, like, how are you going to handle all these things right now, before you even know how to do it? Like, for me, just like taking this from a smaller thing, right? For me and you as content creators, right? It would have probably been very hard in your first year going full time to also have a relationship that you're trying to juggle or a family that you're trying to start, right? Because this takes a lot of, like, thought and things that people don't think about, right? A lot of just watching other YouTubers and just figuring out where trends are going and what you need to do and how you can set yourself apart in time, and just studying things and putting a lot of energy into things that a lot of people don't put energy into. And, it takes a while. Like, I joke about this with my buddy Engraven because he's been doing YouTube forever. But, people will ask me, like, oh, do you write your videos? I'm like, yeah, my first year I wrote my videos because I didn't know what to say, right? Like, so I have this whole script that I'm trying to read off of. But, now I'm in year 2, year 3. Look, I'm off the playbook, man. We running 2-minute drills. We doing this off the dome sometimes. We calling audibles. We're adjusting the defenses and stuff, right? And once you get to that point, maybe you can add more things in. But it's just, it's knowing what you can and cannot do in your situation. And for a young quarterback, it's like they don't know what they can and cannot get away with, what they can and cannot sacrifice or lose, because some guys might be better if they don't have a girlfriend. Other guys, if they don't have somebody to lean on and help them, with certain things, they might fall apart mentally, right? Like, that's also something that we have to keep in mind, right?
They need that stabilizing force.
Yeah, and it's like, until they've done the job for a while, they don't know what they need, right? They just know what they want. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, right? Me as getting into content creation and been doing this for a little while, I'm at a point to where if I did need to add that or did want to add that, I could. Like, I feel like I could add that in there, know how to do it without making too many sacrifices that would like hinder the product. You know what I mean? And it's the same way with the quarterback. Once you get comfortable in your situation, it's why a lot of these dudes remarry like right before they hit their prime, right? It's like, once okay, it's year 5. I know that I can get this amount of work in while also getting this amount of work in with my relationship and with my family, and be able to balance these things better. Because when you're young, so you don't know like what you can and can't sacrifice. I remember when I was in college, I used to freak out. Like, I used to have terrible relationships just because like, I would be like, I have to spend every hour of my life studying for this test because like, I don't know that I don't need to do all of that, right? That was me my freshman and sophomore year. By the time I got to my junior and senior year, I'm like, I could go out this weekend. That test, I got that. Like, you know what I mean? Like you learn eventually how to make your work more efficient as you get used to it and have a process. And I think that's what we don't look at with young players, is understanding that there's going to be that curve, right? Like, you could blame it on the girlfriend, you could blame it on the family or whatever it is that's consuming most of their life, but you have to have them learn at some point what they can get away with, what they can't, and what the boundaries are, or what the boundaries need to be in order for them to maintain the career that they want to, and ask themselves, is that a sacrifice they want to take? Because some dudes don't want to, right? Aaron Donald, famously a dude who like, I'm going to retire early eventually, right? Like, Aaron Donald has talked about retiring as early as this year, because it's not a sacrifice that he wants to make for so long, right? That's fair. That's absolutely fair. But, that's the thing, right? When you're drafting a kid and he's 21, 22, ain't no way that dude knows like what he actually wants to sacrifice. He just knows what he hopes to achieve.
This is a topic I'd never make a video about because, I mean, like, you kind of even said it. It's so – every situation is unique and different. It has their own dynamics. But I talked to one guy who said, he's like, when my first year in the NFL – I was figuring out, like, how to even, like, what time do I get to the facility? How much time, like, when do I go home? How much time? Like, he's learning the NFL. On top of that, his girlfriend had moved in with him. They're living together for the first time. She's not working because she doesn't need to, so he's gone all day. She didn't handle that very well. Like, the relationship, he felt like, was an added burden on top of him trying to figure out the NFL. And I wonder how much that kind of stuff goes on. And this is not just at the quarterback position, but I think mostly the quarterback, because it's so much more demanding than even other positions are. But, man, I just know that does go on. And I think that's a factor. Like, I don't want to make any grand statements, but sometimes when you see a guy struggle early on in their career, I wonder, like, is the girlfriend, is the new wife, is that at all a distraction for guys? And there's a reason I don't talk about it, but I know that does happen.
Well, Zach, I think you could take it I think it happens for everybody, like in life. Like, I think this is the thing a lot of people can, because it's like, people don't talk about it as much, but having somebody like live with you and like learning how to cohabitate with another human being, like, that's not like your roommate from college. You know what I mean? Like, that's an adjustment, man. That they're like, I joke about this all the time, but like, I'm dead serious. Before you turn 25, you have no idea, especially like if you're into women, like what your spouse wants. Like, you're guessing most of the time, right? So that's a huge adjustment. That's something that's taken me years. I'm still trying to figure it out, right? Like, that's a whole adjustment in itself. And then you add the stress of a job, like any job, right? Especially if it's like a job in a career field that you studied for. Lawyer, doctor, nurse, whatever it is, whomever you are, male or female, like, trying to get off the ground with your career and juggle a relationship, it's tough. A lot of people break up at that point, right? Because they just want to figure things out. I know for me, like, when I was This story I've never told before, so they're getting all kind of exclusives today. But when I first graduated college and I wanted to jump into acting because that's the first thing I wanted to do when I moved to LA, I felt like every attachment that I had was burdening me, was stopping me from doing certain things. You don't want me to audition for these kind of roles and stuff like that. And it felt like it was something that got in the way. And it was like, I liked the person, but I felt like I wanted to achieve things. Right. So it's like, it gets like that for a lot of people where it's like, your relationship, you have to figure out, one, how important is that relationship to you? Is it a sacrifice that you're willing to make? Is that person willing to make certain sacrifices? And, when it comes to what you're trying to achieve, is that important enough to you? And it's no shade if it's not important enough to you. But if it's important enough to you to make those sacrifices, is that going to be what y'all want to do? You can't have no half measures. It can't be no, maybe, if the money's good enough. Like, it either is or it isn't, because, it's going to be stressful. It's going to be hard. Again, that's why it's just something that it takes a lot of mental toughness to be successful in anything in life, but let alone quarterback, because, life gives you a ton of things to juggle, and, we're not really in a society that loves to cut people slack at all. So, it's rough. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I don't think it's just exclusive to quarterbacks, though. I would say it's to everybody, definitely. And when it comes to quarterbacks, definitely, bro. Like, you trying to start a family and be the quarterback of an NFL team, that's gotta be hard, right? Like that's gotta be hard.
Yeah.
Especially if there is, if not everybody is on that program, if you're in a relationship and the girlfriend doesn't really understand why you have to spend or feel like you have to spend 8 hours working on your craft or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Or why you're like, superstitious about certain things and all that, and why she always has to read the playbook calls out to you and she needs to regurgitate these things. Like, she ain't down with the program. Like, that's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult, right? But, it's part of the decision-making process as a young quarterback that you got to figure it out. Like, how important is it for me to be a great quarterback? Maybe you don't want to be a great quarterback, but you want to be a great, partner to your spouse. That's cool. You know what I mean? Like, I would hate to draft that number 1 overall, but like personally, like as a man to man, I can't be mad at that decision. But it's just, it's one of those things that you have to figure out how to juggle those things as you go along in life. And everybody's answer to that question is completely different.
Man, we've been talking for 2 hours. We should probably call it. I love talking to you, man. You're the best. I'd love to extend an invitation now. Whenever something happens with the Browns quarterback situation, whatever they draft, I'd love to have you back on to discuss. Like, if they trade for Kirk Cousins, your ass better be back on the show so we can talk about it. That sounds like really, really fun. Oh, yeah. And I just want to let you know I'm a fan of you. I love your content, and I really like you as a person. Like, I just think you're awesome to talk to.
All right, man. Appreciate that, man. It's fun talking to you. Just enjoyed this. The vibes are just immaculate. Fun talking. We went everywhere in this show, right? We talked about the Browns. We talked about young quarterbacks. We talked about life advice. We talked about Eastern Washington, Youngstown State 2016. This is the only podcast where you're going to get this kind of combination, right? Like, this range.
Absolutely, my man. Hey, well, thank you so much, and have a great day. You're the best.
All right, man. Thank you, man.